Huh? Oh. You got, I got more than that. I stole it. Oh. Not eating.
Calling to order Parowan City Council meeting. It's June 8th, 2023. It is 6:02 p.m. Welcome to City Council tonight. Thank you for being here, participating in the discussions and the decisions of the city. It's really important that you're here, and we appreciate you. We're going to open tonight with Jerry Vesley offering us an opening prayer, followed by leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you again for this wonderful day and a beautiful city that we live in. Please guide our council members, our mayor, and our participants in the meeting tonight, that we make decisions that are right by the city and the community. For this we pray in Jesus' name, amen. Amen. If you'll kindly rise and follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic in which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Play ball.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. Does any of the council have a conflict they would like to declare or a personal interest in any of the agenda items tonight?
No, Mayor.
No, Mayor.
No, Mayor.
Okay, now we just need to approve the meeting's agenda by council vote. If I could have a motion to do so.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting's agenda as outlined.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Motion carries. We're moving now into public comment. These items will be open for 2 minutes each. They're not generally things that are on the agenda during the public hearing, so don't get confused with this time with the agenda items that are following below. So these would be things that aren't on tonight's agenda and that you'd like to come up and speak about and bring to the attention of the council. And you have 2 minutes each, so I'd invite you to come to the microphone at this time. You made that really easy, so we can move forward. We'll come out of public comment now into our public hearing. So I would entertain a motion to move into our public hearing.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to go into our public hearing. Regarding, excuse me, the Parowan City Municipal Land Use Codes 15.52.030 and 15.52.050 and 15.04.020 and 15.50.060.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so the motion carries. We will start with a presentation by our city manager. He is going to cover our fiscal year 24 budget. Oh, sorry.
No.
That's a separate.
Oh,
Next public hearing is that one, so.
there we go. I'm going to read the sentence that's on the agenda. These amendments address property access requirements, maintenance of parking lots, hard surface definition, and regulation of billboards in Parowan city limits. So at this time, I would invite our planning and zoning chair to come up and basically address the recommendations that came out of planning and zoning.
Good evening. So basically, out of planning and zoning, we came out with a positive recommendation for the for a new billboard code to regulate billboards in the city. And that's all I'm going to say about that. All of you were forwarded a full recommendation in writing earlier today. So if you have questions about that, here I am. Thank you.
All right, and then I know we kind of have two sides to the story that are here tonight that probably need more than 2 minutes. So I thought about doing a coin toss, but I don't have a coin of which one of you would come up first. Really? Just, either one of you that wants to come up first, come up first. How about I say it like that? Okay, thank you. Yes, you just need to be at the microphone and introduce both of yourselves by your names.
My name is Benjamin Pacheco, and I originally started looking into this process of getting the sign ordinance amended to include billboards, and I'm here with my partner Louisa Brannon, and we just wanted to share some of our talking points on why we feel like Parowan would benefit from having billboards regulated. Parowan currently already has billboards in the city right now, and they are governed pretty much entirely right now by UDOT, and as you've seen, some of those are dilapidated and not in good repair, and as it stands, Parowan right now would have to have UDOT enforce some sort of fines, etc., for these billboards, and if Parowan included billboards into their sign ordinance, they'd actually have a chair at the table and be able to do something about these billboards. I know right now, so some of the land that I bought out by the airport is in a perfect spot where you could bring attention with directional billboards to exits 78 and 75. If you've all seen what's gone on in, say, Fillmore, Beaver, and now Cedar City, who's actively renting the billboards over by exit 78, directing the nearly 5 million passenger vehicles a year passing by I-15 to those towns, I do feel like Parowan could benefit with the increase in commerce that they would have, which would result in a sales tax revenue from getting people off of I-15 and shopping there. I know right now, advertising, outdoor advertising works, it's proven, and it makes a quantifiable and direct impact to increases business and awareness for business in Parowan. I won't say names, but I have spoken with quite a few owners that agreed that they would not mind an increase in commerce and customers. As I said, 5 million passenger vehicles pass by exit 78 and 75 a year, capturing even a small percentage of that. 1% would be almost 50,000 additional vehicles over the year, taking, say, exit 78, because they see these directional billboards. We do ask that planning and zoning or the city council reevaluate the restrictive setback and spacing requirements recommended by planning and zoning, and mostly that is because right now, as I understand it, there is it's being said that there's a possibility of 8 additional billboards allowed if this ordinance amendment was passed. And between looking at the GIS parcel map and talking with UDOT, we are seeing a maximum possibility of 3, and all 3 of those would be within the corridor of the existing 5 billboards that are just north of 78. And most of that is because of proximity to the off-ramps and on-ramps, and or being too far away from the 100-foot right-of-way as described in the proposed ordinance. Do you want to go ahead?
Hello. So we also have like visuals of that where we have a map that can show, and we're happy to show you that. Another point that we feel is necessary to make is that the billboard ordinance, kind of like he was saying earlier, right now Parowan doesn't have the ability to take action about any billboards that are, not looking so great on the south end of town. I believe there's 1 or 2. And if there was an ordinance, there would be abilities to, take action against that, as well as right now the city is not getting any revenue from current billboards, signage permit fees, which, they may not be a lot, but it is something, so that's another thing to consider.
So, some of the other, reasons why we think billboards would be good for Parowan, or, to be regulated in Parowan, it would be providing, options for these local businesses to advertise that they don't have right now. Or local city events, say seasonal events. If there's a slow season for a business, we would be happy to work with them to see what needs they have, and we could work with them to advertise when it helps them the most. It would also facilitate business relationships and networking between businesses here. As I mentioned, for example, exit 163 in Fillmore, you'll see 2 or 3 businesses that have combined and rented out ad space well before both sides of the exit, northbound and southbound, saying, hey, come here, guess what, there's Roxbury smoothies. You may have never heard of a Roxbury smoothie until you saw that billboard, and then you realize it's a chain, and then you say, I'm going to take a trip to Fillmore on my way down to St. George and back, because my kids love smoothies, and they develop these habits. And Parowan has amazing restaurants, and we're right off I-15, but nobody knows about them. There's not options. We do have, the advertisement talking about the suite tour, but with 2 or possibly 3 more opportunities, I do think it would help Parowan. And it also does not take water. So I know that's a big issue in Parowan. So billboards don't consume water. They also don't bring, housing and population increase. So as far as a use of land, we do feel like that's a great use of land. And again, we would ask that there would be additional time looked into to see where the possible 8 billboards would be able to go in, because we don't feel like 8 billboards would be able to be allowed. Another thing, let me just find it right here, is as the proposed amendment is worded, if you look on page 5 of 7, on number 3, it says billboard signs must be erected at least 200 feet away from any neighboring property parcel boundary. So that doesn't exclude the I-15 right-of-way boundary. So you have a contradiction between number 1, the last sentence of number 1, that says located within 100 feet of the right-of-way, and then you have a requirement of being at least 200 feet away from any neighboring property parcel boundary. And that is something we'd like to get examined more, if possibly. I know the 200-foot setback is, I believe, 8 times more than the setback required for a building on somebody's property here, a building structure. And then the 600 feet, that is 100 feet more than UDOT's regulated requirement. And UDOT won't issue a permit unless it's conforming with the local town's ordinance.
Did you want me to have I didn't start a clock, but did you say 10 minutes, or did you not limit it?
I was thinking around 5, but I didn't say 5.
I didn't know, I can't remember what you said, and anyways, I didn't know.
And I didn't look at the clock at the beginning.
Yeah, so that pretty much wraps it up. I know directional billboards would help Parowan's commerce in general. It would increase the city's revenue for additional projects, swimming pools and other projects that you may have, short funds for. And that pretty much wraps up what we wanted to say.
We have the map, if that would be something of interest as well.
We have a couple
Sure.
maps.
You can bring it up and just hand it to the council and they can pass it down. Thank you. Let's start down there.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Those are just additional copies of the same.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Did you want it to come up or?
So, Nancy Dalton, the byway coordinator for Utah's Patchwork Parkway. Gary Erzik is here with us too. Both of us have worked on byways on a state basis. We have dealt with this for over 20 years, and it is, one of those issues is billboards. So, having worked with them, having tracked the billboard industry to keep up with the changes and keep things, just so you know, the byways are protected by a federal mandate, and the only regulatory thing in scenic byways is no off-site billboards or signage. So, the business on the byway can have on-site, but they cannot market somebody down the road. So, that's the only regulatory thing with byways, which means that we still track what the billboard industry is doing. So I'm just going to talk to you about the dark side of billboards. Okay? There is a dark side. It's great advertising. It's great money for whoever's leasing the land. But once you open that up, I promise you, those big billboard companies up in Salt Lake, they're waiting. And they will jump down here and take it up. And to work with them, you may be getting a pretty good deal on your little piece of property, that little footprint of their billboard and access to it. But once they have, you sign that lease, they dictate what you do with your property. And I can give you some examples. Up in Salt Lake, here a number of years ago, probably about 5-6 years ago, Salt Lake wanted to get rid of some of those billboards that are coming into the downtown area, 6 South. The billboard company says, if you want to get rid of that, it's going to cost you. Now, it's not the same reimbursement costs that you get when somebody kills you, somebody's dog chews up your ewe, where you get the 8 years plus all the offspring. No, this goes forever. And they were looking into the tens of millions of dollars to buy that billboard. That billboard still sits there. Then all the cities tried to get together and try to work together with the legislature. No, that didn't happen either. If you want to move a billboard, you give them the same site or even a better site for them to move a billboard. So once it's there, it's not leaving until the world blows up. It's there forever. The next example is down in Murray. There was a billboard on a corner, and residential homes on the side, and this family over on this side, they had a tree that had been there for over 100 years. It's not on the street. It's not in your streetscape. This is on their yard. Sad to say, even with all the pruning they did, it still impeded the view, that line of sight, with that billboard, and they had to take their tree down. There was no way to save that tree and get rid of the billboard. So, if you're looking at an area that's going to have residential growth, and we know that the homes are now being built 2-3 stories high, we know apartments are going 4 and 5 stories high, if that impedes their line of sight, the neighbors cannot use their property as they would like to do. So, just realize there is a dark side, a downside, and proceed with caution as you go through this. And other than that, that's all I can provide you with is just those simple facts and what our experience has been with tracking them and working with them.
Hey, really quickly, you mentioned the byway and restrictions on billboards. Could you just clarify what the byway is specifically and how that ties into this discussion?
Okay. So, so the State Scenic Byway was set up in 1986-88 by the legislature. Then, in 1992, Federal Highways created the National Scenic Byway Program because the Forest Service had a scenic by road, BLM had one, and everybody had one, so they consolidated it all together into one National Scenic Byway. The Scenic Byway Program is a recognition of those roadways that have unique qualities, which they identified as those 6 intrinsic values, and then, so you have 3 pages of what the byway is supposed to be and the corridor management plan and all those things. Then the last paragraph about this big says, this is the only regulatory, there will be no off-site signage on any state or national designated scenic byway. So from exit 75 down to across to the Maverick, down to Center Street, then from Center Street east and up and over to Panguitch is a National Scenic Byway. So no off-site. Now, off-site is, okay, on-site is when you market your own business, or any activities that are happening on that, directly on that piece of property. Off-site is anything happening elsewhere. So, down the road, up on Bryan Head, over to Panguitch, can't advertise there. Now, the byway does have a billboard. We got the old billboard that was there, that was Parowan Cities for ages, and that is out on I-15, so it's not in the byway corridor. So.
And I-15 does not...
Yeah,
this is not restrictive to I-15. I just
No.
wanted to clarify that.
True. So it has to be a highway. It cannot be a freeway. Freeways, oh jeez. Federal highways knows everybody drives too fast to read. So, freeways are not part of the National Scenic Byway Program. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy.
Mayor and City Council, I appreciate this opportunity to address you. And for the record, my address is 422 Joshua Drive, Kaysville, Utah. And you're probably asking, why is this guy from the Wasatch Front here talking in Parowan? I was raised in rural Utah, and I understand wondering why this Wasatch Front guy's here. Well, I'm here for 2 reasons. One is I've got 2 cute granddaughters that live here in Parowan, so I get down here quite often. The second reason is I'm representing Scenic Utah, a nonprofit organization that deals with scenic issues within the state of Utah, has membership throughout the state, and deals with issues with billboards, because we feel that is an issue within the state that needs some attention. And I understand, as I discuss this evening, your job as the Mayor and City Council is to do a balancing act. I worked for city government for over 30 years. I had that, well, where's the city manager? Right here. Oh, there you are. Okay, I had that job for 30-some years and finished my career at Woods Cross. And so I know the issues of the City Council. You have to balance the needs of the private property owners, such as the Pachecos. They have every right to use their property, and we understand property rights, but you also need to balance those with the needs of the public. And in this particular case with billboards, the use is on an interstate highway, and the private property owner did not build that. It was built by the public, and the public maintain it with their taxes. And so I think the public has an interest in billboards and what goes along that highway, because the traveling public, as they drive down those highways, have to live with it. And so that's the balancing act. You have to balance the needs of the private property owners and their desires with the public. So what I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes, I don't want to take a lot of your time, and ask you to consider some things as you're reviewing this proposal. The first one is the character of your community. What do you want the character of your community to be? Do you want it to be commercial signs all over, or do you want it to be a beautiful community? I love this community. My son moved down here a number of years ago. He actually worked for the city as a police officer, and I visited southern Utah. Beautiful place. Do you want it to be that? as I was driving down here, as you exit Beaver, and we all know that, you drive through all those spate of billboards as you come through there. Is that really what you want your community to be and your aesthetics? Do you want billboards and things like that, or do you want a beautiful community? And then tied into that, the impression of those visiting your community. Southern Utah is a beautiful area, and you have a lot of tourists that come here. And what is their vision? What do they think of your community as they drive through it? And I'd say I'm a product of the 50s and 60s, and that's when the Highway Beautification Act came into play. And billboards, I believe at that time, had a real function, and that's because people driving down the highway needed a place to stay, they needed to buy gas, they needed to go to a restaurant, and they didn't have a lot of things to realize, and so the billboards did have a function. But I can guarantee you that my children, when they're going places, they don't use billboards. You know what they use? They use this. They use this. So things have changed. Things have changed. A couple of other things. One, financial considerations. Yes, you'll get permit fees, but I understand city finances, and that's not a big revenue source for the city. Second of all, taxation. Billboards is taxed as personal property, like your vehicle, which means that every year they depreciate, and so every year you get less and less taxes. And on the flip side of it, if you decide that a billboard goes in, and let's say you get a council member on the council that it just hates billboards and is pushing to get rid of the billboard, buying a billboard is very expensive in the state of Utah, because the billboard lobby has made the law so that if you want to buy a billboard, not only do you buy that billboard, but it's tied to a whole bunch of other billboards that they call a showing. And so when you try to buy that billboard, then you've got to take all that into consideration. And so it becomes very, very expensive. So the financial consideration, if you go down the road of getting billboards in your city, you need to realize that you're probably not going to get them out if you decide you don't like them. Now, let's talk about preemption of city ordinances. Larry's done a very good job of writing this ordinance for you, and he's taken into consideration, he's put some things in there, as mentioned by the property owner, that are more restrictive than the state. And I think that's good, because you want to have some control, for instance, the proximity to residential areas. But you need to understand that in the state statute, the state is allowed to preempt local ordinances. In other words, if a billboard needs to be moved for various reasons, and your ordinance is prohibiting it being moved, the state law can preempt your ordinances. And there's three situations that can happen. One is if there's an electrical line that is close to one or one's put in, and that sign needs to be moved because of the electrical line, then the state can preempt your ordinance and move it to wherever they need it to be. The other one is installation of a sound wall. If a sound wall is going in and it blocks a billboard, and that billboard needs to be moved because of that sound wall, they can preempt your ordinance to allow for that. And the third one is, and this came into play when they widened I-15 up through the Wasatch Front, and that is if UDOT needs to widen, reconstruct, or do a change on the interstate, and it requires a billboard to be moved, then the state can preempt your local ordinances to allow that billboard to be moved. And the reason the state did this is that the billboard industry said, hey, if you can't move the billboard, then guess what? You get to buy it. And because, as I mentioned before, the prohibitive costs that they put into it, the state said, whoa, we don't want to buy billboards. And so they put in the ordinance in the state law so that they could move those things around and not have to buy them. And guess who pays the price for it is the local governments. And so you need to be aware of that. Now, I'll be very honest. The circumstances of that happening here in Parowan is probably pretty minute. You know, you're not going to have the power lines, probably sound walls is not going to come into play. And I doubt they're going to do too much work on I-15. So I'll be very honest, that's probably not something that's going to affect you, at least at this point. But because the state has preemption in there, that doesn't stop them from preempting it for anything into the future. So I think that's one thing you need to consider, is the preemption. Let's talk a little bit about digital billboards. Your ordinance allows digital billboards, and the Federal Highway Administration back in 2007 put out a memo and said, states, you need to put into regulations that deal with digital billboards, the duration of the message, the transition time, the brightness, the spacing, and the appropriate location. And all of those are important, because if you have a digital billboard that, for instance, is next to a residential area and it's too bright, you're going to have some problems. Up in Woods Cross, and if you're up in there, you have Murdoch Chevrolet. Maybe some of you have bought cars from them. I don't know. But they had a big digital, and this was an on-premise sign. But the lighting was too bright at times, and there's a residential neighborhood across the street. And so we would get calls all the time from the neighbors. But luckily, we had in our ordinance regulations, so we just go to Murdoch and say, hey, you need to change this. But the problem we've got here is the state does not have any regulations on digital billboards. And Scenic Utah, we approached them and said, why don't you have them? And UDOT says, well, we leave that up to local governments, whatever they do. Which is, I don't believe it meets the federal requirements, but that's the position they've taken. And your ordinance doesn't have that, doesn't have the regulations on digital signs. So you could possibly get some digital signs in there that maybe have some real problems with it, and if you go to UDOT to help you enforce it, it ain't going to happen, because UDOT's going to say, that's up to you. So I guess...
Are you going to wrap things up?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay.
I'm basically done. I'm sorry.
I'm just watching the clock.
Okay,
so.
That's good. Just in closing, I think you really need to consider this proposal to you and the impacts on the city short-term and long-term. So that's the end, and if you have any questions, not, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And this is a public hearing, so the public is welcome to come and speak their mind.
I'm Jed Sudwigs. I read the proposed ordinance, and I would just like to say that I am in favor of enacting a billboard ordinance. The lack of a billboard ordinance leaves the door open for a lot of problems. There is not very many, actually, there's only 4 states that have complete billboard bans. Maine, Vermont, Alaska, and Hawaii, and they went through a huge thing to make sure that they never had them. That's the only states that have been able to do complete bans on them. All the other states that do allow them and already have them, and we already have some within our city limits, it has left the door, it has left the door open for court challenges on lack of a pathway for somebody to have a billboard when others already do. So the current lack of an ordinance with no clear path to obtain a permit, which is the situation we're in right now, it constitutes an implied lack of restrictions in doing so. And so I am in favor of a billboard ordinance that properly regulates the industry. I do feel that the verbiage that's in this particular ordinance is ambiguous on 3 or 4 lines. It needs a little bit of tuning up in order to make it so that it would not create an inordinate amount of work in order to determine whether somebody is compliant or not. I personally believe that the UDOT regs are already restrictive enough, and that if you adopted those straight across the line as opposed to any extra restrictions that are in here, it would eliminate some of the interpretation as to which one applies in any particular area. I know we don't have to worry about Highway 143, so Holyoke Lane all the way over to Panguitch is already protected. That's not going to be an issue. But because of the way the wording in this particular ordinance sets, in my opinion, confuses between on-premise and off-premise signs. It uses some terminology with the setbacks that doesn't make a ton of sense, depending on if you're going with the exact number or if you're going with what you might think it means. So it needs either clearing up, or my opinion would be just to adopt the UDOT regs straight across, and then there's no question. Those are already quite clear and have stood up to just about every court thing. I will say this, if the last 20 years of case law show us anything, an outright ban on billboards will lead to a court challenge, and every city that's had that happen, I can't find a case where the city won in that. So nothing against attorneys making money off of that, but that's where it ends up. The only people that win are the attorneys getting paid for going around that. So I think it should be passed, but I think it should be in a way that allows legally people to do a billboard if they need to. And on a side note, and I'm not speaking in behalf of everybody in the Chamber of Commerce, but as a member of the Chamber of Commerce, we have businesses that would benefit. And a good example of that would be the Painted Hills RV Park. Sure, they can place ads other ways, but tourists coming down the highway are not going to read a newspaper or necessarily listen to a radio station locally that would carry an ad that they would be at that moment hearing, and a billboard would be a great directive to get them off the highway and spend some money locally. That's my opinion, and thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we ask Justin to address some of the things that he said? Legal, you know.
Meet with him and figure out what he's said. As far as, I don't know which ones he's talking about, but if you want to sit down with me, if you want to table it, I'd be glad to sit down with Jed and go through it, try to figure out what his concerns are.
Did you understand what he was saying that clearly, and what's legal and all?
Well, what he said was that there's some areas in the ordinance that look.
I mean, do you feel comfortable with the ordinance, the way it's written?
I did not draft it. They drafted it and Christian reviewed it. I did not review it other than I wrote the first part. So, sorry. So if you want me to look at it in detail, I'll need to sit with Jed and he can go through it with me if he has issues.
I mean, I just thought I'd like to have a legal opinion of the way it's written. That's all.
Maybe after the public hearing, when we're ready to discuss it on the thing, we could talk about options.
Okay.
Mayor, point of information, what is this gentleman's name that spoke before Jed?
Gary Ures.
Gary?
Ures, U-R-E-S-K.
Thank you.
Good evening, council and mayor. My name's Janelle Zajac. I'm a citizen of Parowan. And I am asking you to vote no on this ordinance because I'm not a subject matter expert on billboards. I'm not a subject matter expert on ordinances, but I am a subject matter expert on dark skies at night, and I like to do a lot of star watching, and my husband and I drive out. We have to drive pretty far to go find some total darkness. And I believe that adding any more billboards to Parowan is going to detract from the skyline and the horizon of our beautiful city. So please say no.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Okay, we'll move on now to the next item.
You have to close out.
Okay, we're closing this, I need a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing and go back into the city council meeting.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
One question, was anybody gonna comment on the hard surface
That's coming up next.
Oh,
Oh,
no,
that
I
was
guess that,
included in it.
That's,
Oh, no, that's right, yeah.
That was included in it.
yeah, so, but I didn't
That's
hear any,
Okay.
I didn't.
okay.
Did anybody have a comment on that?
Did anyone have a comment on the hard surface ordinance?
Before we go.
You need to come up to the microphone and state.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. We're closing the public portion and moving into the consent meeting. Oh,
Nope.
I'm sorry, public hearing. I wrote too many notes on my paper. We are gonna get a presentation now, jumped the gun earlier, for our fiscal year '24 budget.
Okay, I'm gonna give a presentation on the budget and then before the public hearing. Bear with me, you guys know that sometimes I'm a little long-winded, but I'm gonna try to talk quickly and get through this. In defense of taking a little bit of time on this, this is one of the most important things that this legislative body does in a year, so we don't want to sell it short. First of all, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the economy and considerations that the city considers when it comes to forecasting revenues, looking at everything from, employee pay to, taxes and expenses the city is going to look at and everything. It is a big portion as we consider the upcoming fiscal year and how we're gonna deal with it. I will have budget highlights of what's on the tentative budget, and, we'll talk about that. And, the tentative budget is available if anybody wants to look at it. Tonight will be a public hearing, and it won't be voted on until next week. So if anything comes out of this meeting today that the council wants to consider before it's adopted, it's called tentative for a reason, right?
Mhm.
And then, I put question and answer. I generally feel like in a public hearing like this, if there's specific individual questions about what may be in or out of the budget, now is a good time. So I'll entertain questions, during the public hearing if the mayor permits. So, anyways. So, real quick, on the economy, there's a big debate right now, recession. Are we in a recession? Is a recession coming? Definition of a recession is a significant, widespread, and prolonged downturn in economic activity. Whether you like him or not, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell is one of the biggest voices in the economy, and this is what he recently said. I think nobody knows whether there's going to be a recession or not, and if so, how bad a recession would be. Having said that, there are some things that I would like to discuss about potentially a potential recession, how it would affect the city. One of those things is we are currently in the environment of what's called a inverted yield curve, which only happens every once in a while. This is often referred to as a harbinger of recessions. Essentially, these Treasury rates are set by the market, and basically when the yield curve inverts, normally you get more money by buying if you're investing in bonds or something like that, you're going to get a higher interest rate for a longer term bond, right? Right now that's not the case. You can get a short term bond and get a higher yield on it than you would if you had a long term bond. That rarely ever happens. The yield curve normally looks like this black line. Right now it looks like the blue line. That is something, basically what the market is doing is it is worried about the future. It's saying it is less likely to be a safe investment into the future than it is today. The reason why the inverted yield curve is such an interesting thing, this graph is a bit busy, I admit, but these areas, this in blue and red basically shows the typical spread of the yield curve. When it's in blue, it looks normal. When it's in red, that means it's inverted. and these gray bars are recessions that have happened in the past. This goes back to 1965. So you'll notice right before most of these recessions, you'll see that the yield curve inverts in almost every case. Of course, one of my favorite sayings is, and I'll probably butcher it, but economists have successfully predicted 10 out of the last 4 recessions. This does not guarantee that we will have a recession, but it is kind of a very scary thing when the markets are behaving very irrationally in how you invest money. Another graph, this is from the Federal Reserve, or the Bank of New York. It is one of the banks that is in the Federal Reserve, and they actually do a probability, and one of the main things that they're looking at is yield curve, amongst other things. They basically, this is the same thing where you see these dark bands that go down. Those are recessions, and they assign a probability that we will be in a recession within the next year. When this was done in March, they basically said there was a 57% chance, almost 58, that we will be in a recession within the next year. I'm not trying to, by the way, I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm not trying to predict a recession. What I'm saying is, as we factor, and you'll see how this ties into some of the budget considerations, we have to plan as a city. We have to make sure that we have our forecast well, that we're being smart with our money, and that we don't get into a situation where we're relying on revenues that may be volatile and go away or whatever. Index of consumer sentiment. There's a saying that says, as the consumer goes, so goes the economy. The consumer spending is probably one of the biggest functions of the economy. When consumers get spooked and stop spending, it becomes the very thing that, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So they track consumer sentiment, University of Michigan does, and you'll see this, it dropped down in 2020, imagine why. And then it started to climb a little bit. Then it hit its low point about April of 2022. Why do you think that happened? Inflation, right? Consumers are getting pummeled by inflation, getting a little bit spooked. It's kind of jumped back up a little bit and kind of back down. But 60 is not a high number on consumer sentiment. Talk a little bit about unemployment. A low unemployment rate is typically thought of as a good thing. But not when it gets too low. So this is state by state, the unemployment rate as of last November. Some of these things lag a little bit in their reporting, but Utah, as of last November, had the lowest unemployment rate in the nation at 2.2% last November. That's bad. Your optimal employment rate is about 5%. When it gets drastically below that, it means you have a labor shortage. I'm going to talk a little bit about how that affects employers, and the city is a big employer. We're probably the biggest in Parowan, maybe the school district.
School district is.
They've got us. But as an employer, when unemployment is incredibly low, it means we have a hard time finding employees. It means we'll talk about the effect on wages. This is unemployment rates by county, and you'll see that, so the lighter the color, the lower the rate. Iron County is at 2.4, one of the lowest counties. Of course, they're all right around in that area. So that's Iron County. And unemployment as of right now, when I just pulled this, is at 2.3%. You see this spike in unemployment where it jumped up 10%. That was COVID. That was one of the craziest things. They'll study that for years, right? I'm not going to bog down too much. So this is states where they're at versus pre-COVID employment levels. Utah, on the other hand, is leading the nation because we have been putting more people to work. And Utah and Idaho were the very first states to come positive on employment after COVID. And Utah has really led the nation in that. We're 6.6% above in November of 22 versus February of 2020. So Utah has really led the way out with employment. And you're going to find there's a lot of really good things about the Utah economy as I talk about this. This is U.S. job growth. And you can just see how job growth has just marched steadily forward. Normally, this is gonna bounce up and down a little bit. These are, month to month, employment change. They just came out in November, and there's one that's about ready to come out. They will predict, it will be released, but the last one was November, in the numbers that I have here. So, there's been strong hiring. Industries, year over year that have grown in Utah, almost every single industry has grown in employment, with the exception of financial activities and business services, professional business. These are businesses that are hypersensitive to interest rates, right? So other than that, most industries have been growing. Utah's unemployment rate, that's just another one that shows the spike. Labor force participation. This is actually a really, kind of a problem. With COVID, we saw what we call the Great Resignation, where you had a lot of people, boomers and other late, what came after boomers? It wasn't Generation X. Whatever it was. Maybe it was Generation X. You had a Great Resignation. You had people that retired early. They decided, I'm out. To a large extent, they have not come back into the labor force. It's hard to see this green line, but it had been basically on a steady decline, labor force participation. Basically, there's people sitting on the sidelines, not working on purpose. It's contributing to our unemployment level being so low, and it's contributing to wages doing what they're doing. So we're at 62.1. The high in 2000 was at 67. Now, when you talk about this is the country as a whole. That's a huge chunk of people that are not working. Specifically, they saw a lot of mothers, females that left the workforce with COVID, and a lot of near retire age that said, I'm out, and they didn't come back. Okay, Utah labor participation is much higher. Utah is in blue, much higher than the rest of the country. In fact, you see the really sharp downturn in the country in green. Utah didn't have quite as high of a downturn, quite as steep of a downturn, and we are at a higher percentage of labor force participation. When we get really desperate like we are for labor right now, it incentivizes more people to come off the sidelines. But that's been the case for some time. In Utah, we just work a little bit more than the rest of the country. So, but all of this, the reason I spend a lot of time talking about this when it comes to unemployment is when workers are in high demand, there's not enough workers to fill the jobs, then inflation, wage inflation, chases those workers. People keep offering more and more and more money, and it is one of the single biggest contributions to inflation. It impacts, basically it's an employee labor market, right? And so you have a lot of people that are they're bouncing jobs, they're deciding, they're kind of dictating to their employers' terms, and one of the biggest things has been in inflation with wages, which is kind of a self-fulfilling, wrong metaphor. The problem is it contributes to inflation, and then inflation eats up the additional wages that they got. Everybody keeps chasing the workers and pays more. Then that money then is devalued by inflation, and it is a death spiral, right? Inflation is kind of nasty. This sounds all bad. It's not. But some of the other big contributors to inflation, because inflation affects the city, and I'll get into some of the details on these things. But just some interesting things. The U.S. money supply increased at a level that it has not in the last 30 years. This was the bubble. The internet bubble was this recession here after 2000. Oh, I thought you guys could see my thing, and you can't. The larger gray band was the 2008 recession, but really it was COVID and the unrestrained printing of money by the Fed that basically added somewhere around $6 trillion in money into the system. It is not the single cause for inflation, but we are still just dealing with the effects of this in the economy, to the point where most of the models don't work as we try to figure this thing out. Inflation is slowing. This is good news. This is year-over-year percentage. And as of November, it had come down to 7%. It reached almost 9%. This is federally. And believe it or not, the Fed does have a target inflation rate. Some inflation is good. The target is officially 2%. That's what the Fed targets. Anything above that and the higher above that it gets, the more desperate the Fed gets to try to contain it. The good news is that mountain states, so this is going to be Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and so forth, that national inflation is above Utah's inflation, and so we're kind of chasing that a little bit ahead of the curve there, which is a good thing. One of the big things driving inflation is the shortage of supply and demand. Of course, we had some major shipping problems and everything. The cost of shipping, the blue line is a 40-foot container. The cost of getting a 40-foot container tracked around the world, and the one in yellow is the spot rate versus the contract rate on trucking and so forth. So those things are finally coming down. We're hoping that supply chain it will right itself. Finally, just a little bit on interest. The Fed's goal is they have stated that their terminal rate is right around 5%. It is a moving target. Everybody knows they've been increasing rates. They are, markets expect the rates to be, because the markets can actually predict what the Fed does better than what the Fed says that they're going to do. Market is predicting that they're going to stop with interest rate hikes around 5%. And why is that important? The Fed has got a really tough challenge to engineer a soft landing of the economy. Inflation is a killer, and it is really, really hard. If you look at back in the 70s, so the blue line is actually inflation. It's actually the CPI. And the red line is interest rates. It is one of the only tools the Fed has to fight inflation, and it's not a very good tool. Basically, they need to pull money out of the economy. They need to put the brakes on the economy without engineering a bad crash or a recession. Every time they did that, as they were fighting inflation in the 70s and 80s, they would ramp up interest rates, and then there was a recession. They would panic and lower interest rates, and then the inflation would come raging back. That's what you see, that first bump, and then the second bump, and then the third bump. The third bump, things got so high. I don't know if anybody here bought a house back then. So interest rates, 20%. That's insane.
Mine was 18.
Basically, Paul Volcker said, we're going to kill this one way or the other. And he just hammered it so hard, and it worked, right? But it was painful. So the danger is that the Fed yields to pressure, political pressure, market pressure, to pull their foot off of the interest rate gas pedal, if you will, because then inflation can come roaring back, right? You actually want enough pain that people slow down their spending, they slow the economy without creating a bigger problem. Of course, 30-year mortgage rate is not tied. They don't set that. That's set by the markets. As of right today, it's jumped up. The average 30-day mortgage rate has jumped up to about 6.7%. Second to last slide on the economy is home prices. Home price growth is slowing. In blue, you're looking at the U.S. In green, you're looking at Idaho. The reason why Idaho is on here is because Idaho is kind of they're the first to go out of control, and then they're kind of one of the first ones to start crashing. And you see that Idaho is their year-over-year percent change in pricing is down really, really low. They're down to 3.1% year-over-year home pricing. Utah's at 8.6%, and the U.S. is still at 12%. So there again, you don't need the housing market to crash. You just need it to not burn so hot, because housing is a major cost driver of inflation. Okay. In summary, economic growth, uncertain. This is from Zions Bank. They have good information on this stuff. Interest rates are increasing, but they're kind of expecting to flatten out about 5%. When I say interest rates, I'm talking about the Fed. The markets will dictate whatever that happens for the rest of them that you and I pay. Job creation is increasing, but unemployment is low. Wage inflation is increasing. It's still driving inflation big time. Labor force participation is really low, which is still contributing to that. Consumer confidence is low, but it is starting to bounce a little bit. Inflation is dropping, but it's still too high. House prices are dropping. They have this as a negative thing. I think that we can all agree we need housing prices to not be so insanely high, but you don't want to crash the market. The Mountain West region is strong, specifically Utah's economy. It's going to sound like I'm preaching Governor Cox's spiel, but it's true. Utah has one of the most resilient economies and one of the most diversified economies in the entire country. It is one of the reasons, plus some better politics than some of the national politics. And when I say politics, I mean policies specifically. Utah's economy is good. It's healthy. Iron County as a whole is good and healthy. So I'm going to now talk about Parowan City budget highlights, and I'm going to tie in some of these things to how we came up with the numbers, kind of the approach towards COLA, towards spending, towards taxes, and all of this stuff. But I really wanted to paint that picture. All of these things are things that we have to understand as a city as we kind of make these big decisions. So, highlights. No property tax increase is planned for the budget. Later on the agenda, we will be adopting the certified rate that the auditor is giving us, and this would be the time when we would decline it and trigger truth in taxation if we were going to increase taxes, and we don't have any plans to do that. So that's a good thing, I think. People would like that. Revenues have been strong. Some of the expected pullbacks in the revenues, everybody debated whether sales tax would crash, what happens during a recession. It's very difficult to forecast revenues. It's extremely difficult to forecast revenues when you're in an environment like this, when you feel like you're in a bathtub and somebody just threw a rock in, and there's these waves that are just coming back and forth, and 1 minute this is good, and the next minute that's bad, and then we can't buy this, and then prices are jumping up. We're seeing it in energy, right? All of these things. The Kim Gardner Institute, that's not just some random institute that I picked because they had information I wanted to share. That is who the governor's office actually subcontracts all of their economic advice or advisory duties to. They have Utah economy expecting to grow 3% in 2023. That's a calendar year number. But as I have gone back through and I've been forecasting and looking at our past with sales tax, I think 3% is a conservative number to plan on. If we have a major hit to the economy, it could, like where the city is the most sensitive to that is in sales tax. People stop buying things, the city gets less sales tax. However, the offset to that is inflation, because the more goods cost, the more tax that we collect, because it's a percentage of the total. So it's hard to decide which of those two factors is going to have the biggest impact on the city's sales tax. Is it the fact that the economy may be pulling back, but everything costs more? So what is the effect, generally speaking? I couldn't find any reason to disagree with the Kim Gardner Institute for our upcoming budget year, so we're budgeting sales tax at a 3% growth rate, and it's really our most potentially volatile revenue. Property tax only increases. It is not sensitive to inflation. In fact, it has zero inflationary component built into it. The scary thing about that is, as inflation rises, we get the same amount of property tax dollars for the same amount of houses that we had. So we literally have to do more with less. That's the way that the truth in taxation process in Utah is designed. We either do small property tax increases to keep up with inflation, or we just have less spending dollars. Now, having said that, when there are more new houses built, the assessor and in the county property tax world, they call that new growth. we will get some new property tax dollars, but we also then have to serve additional households, right? But our dollars, our spending dollars of property tax will decline over time. And I could show you some really cool graphs about that as a whole, but I won't. Trying to keep it somewhat minimal. I say in here that waiting for final numbers, and actually, the county auditor called me this afternoon and said, we finally got the new numbers. So tonight we were going to generically, adopt the auditor certified tax rate and revenue, but we actually have the actual numbers, which Callie's gonna plug in for us. So, and we do have some new growth that we will get this year. Building revenues are slowing. One of the things that Parowan is experiencing is, less and less actual building lots that are even available. We're coming to a shortage of building lots. However, we are seeing some commercial development. Commercial development is the best kind of new growth for us because you build a store and it's generally worth a lot more than a house, and a commercial business pays the full tax rate. A primary residence gets a 45% exemption. So hopefully with some of this commercial development that is going in, it will increase our property tax revenues, which will give us more of a cushion so that we can provide services without having to look at a tax increase in the future. So we'll see how that goes. Salary and wages. I talked a lot about inflation. I talked about the pressures that we're seeing. Of course, our employees are experiencing increases in inflation just like everybody else. They can demand more. They can jump ship and go somewhere else and make more money. So inflation, one of the hardest things to be in this environment of inflation and a really, really low unemployment rate is that we are under a lot of pressure to look at COLA adjustments as a city to try to retain our employees. It's really, really difficult. If you remember last year at this time when the city went through truth and taxation, one of the main reasons was to implement a step-in grade program and give an increase, a pretty large COLA and some increase specifically to law enforcement, but the city as a whole was able to get a COLA as well. We implemented that step-in grade system, but it needs a little bit of work. We talked in our preliminary budget hearing meetings about forming a committee. Normally, a step-in grade system has some automatic features that, so an employee, if they get hired on and they're at a grade 5, they have so many steps within that grade. They know what they can do to proceed through those steps. And if they want to get paid at a higher grade, then they can go to a different job within the city, or sometimes they can jump up to a new grade as they go from, Parks guy number 1 to Parks guy number 2, or police officer 1 to police officer 2, then they can jump up a grade. We don't really have, we have a step in grade, but it is not really fully developed, so we're going to work on that. But what is in this budget isn't any major changes to specific employees, moving them around in their grades. We do need to look at some. We don't have anything built into this budget as an automatic, but with this committee, we're going to look at it. We do have a few employees that probably need some adjustments here and there, but none of that is built into this budget. What is built into this budget is the city is looking at a new metric to use when we decide whether or not we're going to do a COLA in a given year. What some cities do, it'd be interesting to see what our former city manager out here does, is they look to an entity like URS, the Utah Retirement Systems. They do COLA adjustments to those that are retired. Everybody always talks about those living on a set income. There are COLA adjustments to Social Security. It's not as set as sometimes we want to think. A lot of retirement programs like URS have a COLA adjustment. And so what a lot of cities do, they will look to see what somebody like URS does, which is employing accountants, actuaries, economists. They're spending a lot of time. They're looking at the CPI housing, CPI everything. They're looking at the local Utah costs. So what Utah Retirements is recommending is an 8% COLA. However, URS has a cap, a hard cap on that. It can never go above 4. So their actuaries tell them it should be 8, but they cap it at 4. So what is in this budget is a consideration of a 4% COLA adjustment for employees. So again, we're not individually picking departments or any individual employee and throwing extra money at them in this budget. What we are looking at is a 4% COLA. Total budget comparison year over year. Now this is going to shock you, and don't get shocked because I'll explain it. Last year's budget was just under $8 million. This year's budget is just under $13 million. So that looks like we've added $5 million to our budget, right? That number consists of all the expenditures, whether it's city funds, whether it is grant funds, whatever it is. And so I'm going to explain to you what is actually happening. This shows the prior year versus this year. The prior year is in light blue. This year is in dark blue. Oh, you probably can't see that. This says General Fund, Municipal Building Authority, Capital Projects Fund, Water Fund, Sewer Fund, Electric Fund, Solid Waste, and Irrigation. You'll notice the Capital Projects Fund last year was somewhere around $800,000. This year it's north of $4 million. That is where the bulk of the difference in the overall size of the budget year over year. The majority of that, we'll actually talk about capital projects specifically, but the majority of that is we have 2 major FAA grants to do some runway rehab. In fact, we're going to completely overhaul our runway at the airport. I'll talk about that in a minute. That's a major project that the city basically gets 95% of those dollars from the federal and state sources. So, anyways, it artificially makes our budget really large as we have some of these grants. We also have some grants that will play out in the general fund, which I'll talk about. So the majority of this revenue or expenses, this is expenditures, the large size difference is that what I just talked about. The electric fund, of course, we are experiencing increased rates on expenses. Our power bills are going up. That's why you see the electric funds year over year. This is the budget distribution by fund. Basically this year, the capital projects fund is 32% of our overall budget. That's like such an anomaly. That's never the case. Usually the general fund and the electric fund are fighting to see who is the biggest in a given year, but this year it's the capital projects fund that takes the cake. So a couple of the big, large capital projects I'll talk about, then I'll have the list of all of the capital projects that were discussed in our preliminary meetings. And, but I just wanted to talk about the real big ones. I already mentioned runway reconstruction. Its estimate, not what we'll actually end up spending, but the estimate, which is what I built the budget around, is $2.8 million. And of that, Parowan City has a 5% match. So we get 19-to-1 return on our dollars invested there. They're basically going to grind down the entire runway and rebuild it from scratch. We'll have a brand new runway. This has been on our capital improvement plan with our airport for a long time. The day is finally here. We're excited about it. And then we have a grant which is exclusively UDOT. People don't realize there's an airway component. There's an airport department within UDOT, and they have a grant for us to do rehab our taxiway, and its amount is $211,000 and 111. We have a 10% match on that one. This is one that we have talked about in this meeting. We didn't talk about it because we didn't really have numbers when we were doing our budget, when we were doing our preliminary budget hearings for the city council, but we've talked about it as a city council in the meeting. We're looking at doing a large water recharge project. The estimate, and right now we haven't even got estimates like actual cost estimates, but we're guessing it's going to be somewhere around $750,000. Almost the bulk of all of that is going to be grant funds from the state, from the county, from some of the city's ARPA funds. The pumpers are bringing in a grant and some cash, most likely if they decide to, and our water company will bring in some cash. This year we watched all this water go down. It goes out to Little Salt Lake and does our aquifer no good. It's going to evaporate. The project, in order to, and there's basically our step A, our first phase is the county gravel pit. After that, we'll be looking at other gravel pits. But this is a much needed thing, and it's definitely a super high priority for the city to get that done, get it engineered, get a construction company hired, and get it built. Parowan Pool has been a topic of discussion, of course. Everybody is aware of this, so I won't spend too much time. Basically, we're trying to get it open by July 4th. I wasn't sure what was going to be spent in this year. We're going to have to do an amendment of this year's budget next meeting, and what was going to be spent the following year. So when I was building this budget, I basically put $300,000 that we have, remember we set aside 150 and 150 plus donations. How much is donations? I didn't even know. So basically I just put $375,000 in there. $375,000. I don't know if we'll get $75,000 in donations, but we have been getting a ton of donations. It's been going really well. We're in the middle of it. Basically, we're not going to spend $375 in this year's budget and $375 in next year's. We're just figuring that whatever is left over from what is spent in this year after our amendment, we will finish the project in '24. But it does have to basically live in both budgets. So that's a large one and kind of a significant one. That's a picture of our bridge.
That's what we need.
So as we were looking at our capital projects fund, we didn't have all of the money accrued in our capital projects fund that we need to for the bridge project as it is currently written. So we are going to accrue an additional $149,239, which will bring us to the required match, the way it is written right now, of $341,479. Is most likely the city is going to have to spend more than that, but we don't know. We're still looking at options, but we wanted to make sure that we had the money sitting in our capital projects so that we can show that to UDOT, to the FAA, that we are compliant with our match dollars. So that's a big one. Okay, so now we're down to the specifics of capital projects. I've already talked about the top 5 here. Some of the other things on here, we have a couple of large projects for the electric company, substation enhancements. TA expansion, we're talking about, we need to expand our power line across the freeway. We're currently serving TA, but we don't actually have any infrastructure there. They buy our power through Rocky Mountain. It's kind of a weird deal, but we really want to get that built across the freeway. Jeremy's working on a much cheaper version, but when we built this budget a while back, we allocated $50,000. We'll see how much it ends up costing. New garbage truck at $45,000. That is not something we're going to buy this year. These things cost more like $300,000. We're just going to be setting aside money. We set aside money for so many years, and then we buy a new truck, and then we basically use all the proceeds from the garbage company to get ready to buy a new truck again. That's really all that we have to do with that fund, but we are now starting the accrual process. $45,000 to insulate and heat the large Public Works building. This is something that we've talked about for quite some time. We have a big metal building. We have a lot of equipment that sits in there. Our power trucks, the hydraulics. There's certain things we have to do to winterize them that we won't if we can actually have them heated. Not to mention working on them and so forth. So they've been asking for this for some time, and we put it in this budget. Bike park. This is a grant, $44,000. The total grant is written higher than that. I think it's about 65, but that includes a bunch of in-kind work. The actual cash that'll flow out will be $44,400, and we'll talk about that in upcoming meetings where we talk about locations as we discuss pickleball and bike parks and kind of where we're going to decide where to put things. But that'll be in future meetings. Public safety building, we're setting aside another $35,000 every year. We're accruing towards a new fire building, fire department. That's going to take some time. Once we get enough money saved up, we'll go after some grants and hopefully get us some assistance with some CIB or CDBG grant funds. Jaws of Life, they actually bought one of the pieces this current year, $35,000. In the next year, we have another $35,000. They'll be able to buy the other piece. This is critical as we support a lot of things on the freeway up and down Parowan Canyon. It's pretty obvious what Jaws of Life are. Furnace replacement. I threw a random placeholder number. I don't know what it's going to cost, but the library is basically barely hanging on with its furnace and AC units. And when it dies, we're gonna have to have a major overhaul. What we have, with the new stuff that's available won't fit where the old stuff is. So we're gonna have to probably reconfigure the whole thing with mini splits and different things like that. So I just put a placeholder in that. If we spend more than that, we'll have to amend the budget. Line extension on 2200 West, that's one of 3 years that we'll extend the line as we go down 2200 West with the electric company. Almost done. Road enhancements for the cemetery, that's again money we're accruing, $15,000 towards when we actually get ready to do that. New shop heaters, that's for the one building that we have that is heated. The shop heaters are failing. We've been basically just nursing them along, but they need to be replaced. PTO mower for the parks, $12,000, which will increase his efficiency and productivity. City hall improvements, there was, long story, there was never, probably we were saving money. This place, you was supposed to have a full basement. What we ended up being able to afford was what we got. The north side of the building, there's no emergency egress, and we've talked about rectifying that. We probably won't have to spend that much, but we need to do something in the police department too. So some minor improvements to the city hall, catwalk for the sewer lagoons, a LiDAR unit for the police, and camera systems for public works and parks, which will be spread out. We have a lot of vandalism. So these are the capital projects that were discussed. They were either outright approved or we voted that we were in support of doing those. These are the ones that made it in. There's another list, probably as long as this, that did not. Don't think that we said yes to everything. We actually said no to a lot of things. And told department heads to go back to the drawing board, come up with money and so forth. Other financial highlights, almost done. We're increasing road maintenance budget. Translation, this is how we keep our roads, we get ahead of the curve. We're increasing it 47% to $250,000. We've typically budgeted about $170,000. We really want to, for a number of years, this is one of my own initiatives, we need to get ahead of our road maintenance. Basically, we got to get caught up, and we need to do a certain amount every year in order to get caught up. Roads are a major, major, major asset of the city, and if you do not stay on top of them on the front end of the road, on the front end of a road's life cycle, you will pay an incredible amount more to repair it once it really gets bad. Think Airport Road. And the conventional wisdom is you fix the roads that are in need of a little bit of maintenance, you prioritize that. That is, it seems a little backwards. You'd think you go over the worst road, but actually dollar for dollar, you want to keep your good roads good and then get some large funding, some grants and stuff to do, which is what we're looking to do with the Airport Road. If we have to bite the bullet and do it ourselves, we'll do it, but it's going to cost a lot of money to put a heavy haul road of asphalt out there. So we'll probably grind it up and go back to road base and then get a grant to do a good heavy haul asphalt road. But anyways, new arts program. This is not a large item, but it is a significant item. It was specifically voted in the council meeting to support new arts program of $2,500. That's going to be being led. That effort will be led by former mayor Steve Decker. I always want to call him his brother's name. And speaking of arts, we are considering the adoption of a rap tax. This will be later on the agenda we'll talk about, and on the ballot in November. This is not something the city can institute. It's something that the voters have to agree to. That's recreation, arts, and parks, and we're talking about that. I did not build any rap revenue into the budget. So if that passes, we'll amend the budget and plan how we're going to spend it. But we have to have a committee set up, and so I just thought it would be really preemptive to try to say how we were going to spend that money. So I just didn't. We're considering hiring a rec director. We ended up hiring a seasonal pool director, and we're going to continue to have the conversation about a rec director. I think a big part of that conversation is going to be whether rap tax passes or not, or whether we have to fund it with general fund money. We are going to be leasing a large track hoe. This isn't a capital item because it's a lease, not something we're buying. If this flood season has taught us anything, not having a track hoe for the city, a large one, we have a couple of minis, is really scary, frankly. So we're going to split this lease payment across several of the enterprise funds. And, we don't have it built into the budget. I do have engineering built into the budget for Dry Lakes Pond.
Dry Canyon.
Dry Canyon Pond. Oh, dang it, I thought I didn't have any problems in my wording. Dry Canyon Pond. The BLM is going through their process to get all of the clearance for a lease, with, NEPA. If that happens, we'll probably do a budget amendment and consider, doing something. But first, we'll have to design it, and I did put $15,000 in the budget for some design work. Since we already have preliminary design, that was a dart that I threw, and that's what I came up with. Okay, executive summary. Inflation. It affects our purchasing power, our revenues, our expenses, and our employees. Recession could impact city revenues, definitely impact city citizens. Reopening of the city pool is just even though it may not be a super big one, it feels a lot bigger than maybe it is on the budget. It's a big deal for the community. I'm just gonna say that FY 2024, stands for fiscal year 2024, is the year of grants, especially in capital projects. And lastly, I'd just like to say that Parowan City is well managed and fiscally sound, and we need to continue to navigate the volatility in the economy, but we have a good council, we have a great mayor, it almost sounds like I was putting the mayor above the council. She does sit higher. We have a great council, we have a great mayor, and we have a very average city manager, and
I disagree.
but I was really pleased to see when I got here and I started doing some intense fiscal analysis of the city, and we really are strong. We have problems, we have things that we're working on, but the city is in a much better state than it was 7 years ago when I was studying the financial statements. So anyways, that's my presentation. So I don't know if you want to open the public hearing and we can just talk about it, we can answer it. I have specific numbers if anybody wants to ask about anything specifically.
Okay, I'll try to not mess this up this time. I need a motion to open the public hearing to hear comments regarding the fiscal year 2023-24 budget.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing for comments regarding the fiscal year 2023-24 budget for comments.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, the public hearing is now open.
Oh, come on, people. I know you have like a comment.
I do have one that came in by email. I didn't know if any of the other council members were going to read it or mention it, but there was a community member that did want mention of recommending a 6th police officer. Probably should have printed that out, but did anyone?
So I have, everybody has a copy, all the council has a copy. If any of the public wants a copy, before it's finalized, we'll add an executive summary and graphs and all this stuff. It really is tentative, but if anybody wants a copy of this, I don't know, Judy, can we put this on our website? We'll put it on the website. It'll be out there. It is in the format that the state makes us do, so don't think that we're trying to get weird. I cleaned it up. If we print this straight out of Polaris, it has so much detail that it's almost illegible. This basically is what the state makes us say when we file this with the state auditor's office. It has the prior year actual expenses. It has the current year-to-date expenses, which that year is not done, and it has the ensuing year or the upcoming year's budget. Those are the 3 columns by state code that we have to have in our budget report. Now, the middle column, those numbers need to be updated I'd like to put the very last numbers. I think these are probably 2 or 3 months old on there, and there's a few. We need to assign some account numbers to some of these new accounts that we created, and just a few little details like that before it's final, and it's really pretty and glossy. So, but it is available if anybody wants to look at it, or I always have an open door policy any given time to come in and talk to me or talk to Judy or anybody. So, sorry, Mayor.
Okay, so I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing for the budget, 24 budget hearing.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion carries, thank you. We'll move now into the consent meeting, and these are items that are generally approved with one motion. We have the approval of the warrant register for 6/8/24 and the approval of May 23rd financial statement.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent meeting items number 6 through 7.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you, motion carries. Moving now into our action meeting, these are items that do require a vote. Item number 8 is the approval of the utility write-offs for fiscal year 23.
Why don't you come say something? 'Cause I know you like to be at that microphone.
These are just, we're trying to get these off our books. It's not that we don't try and still collect them, or, one we have a lien on. There's one that we'll never collect on, but we just want to get them off our books so that they don't continue to sit there, so. And it's not too bad of a write-off this year. The one is a great big one that we still, we have a lien on, so we'll get paid eventually.
Judy, how do we, I remember at the county, we would just push them over to property tax and they would get collected there. Do we, other than a lien, you say that we'll continue to collect them, we write them off, but what is our mechanism for doing that? Just curious.
We take them to small claims if we can find them. If not, we go through a collection agency. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay,
I just didn't know what we did.
okay.
Thank you. If there aren't any other questions, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the utility write-offs for fiscal year 23.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, now number 9, approval of the fraud assessment for fiscal year 23.
The auditor's office says, well, you probably remember this, we do this every year, we have to have it approved every year. This year we upped our score, well, our risk level went down because we upped our score, so we're doing really good. We're in the low level risk level low. So we're doing really good.
Thank you.
The only thing we don't have is a formal audit committee, and we have an internal one. We have our auditors come in, so that's the only thing we don't have is that formal audit committee.
Judy, is that something that you recommend, or is it just we're a small enough city that we don't need an internal?
I wouldn't think we would need that formal audit committee. We have internal controls that are really good. Our auditors, we can call on them at any time, and so I don't think that we would need that. That's more for a larger city.
That's kind of what I was thinking. So
Yeah.
we're basically maxed out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I entertain a motion to approve our fraud assessment for fiscal year 23.
I'll make a motion to approve our fraud assessment for fiscal year 23.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Item number 10, adoption of the fiscal year 24 tentative budget. And this one,
So this is not adopting the budget, that'll be done next time to final adoption of the budget. It's just that we have to approve the tentative budget itself. So we approve the tentative, then next week the next council will be the final adoption. That's the one that counts.
Hey, Dan, can you go back through your presentation?
No.
Yes, gladly. Callie, can we switch that?
I didn't get enough notes. My hand got tired. I thought I was in Econ 101 again. I flunked that one, just to let you know, Dan.
Is there gonna be a public hearing next time?
No, this is the public hearing.
public hearing.
Mhm.
Okay.
So this is, when we would adopt the tentative, and so I just need a motion to do that tonight.
And we will, by the way, we need to, next week, and it's a little confusing because the time that we're adopting next year's budget, we will also be amending the current year budget. And that will require a public hearing.
Right, that's what I was.
Yeah, we'll have a public hearing and do amendments, and we can do them in the same meeting.
Okay.
But we usually like to split the public hearing and the final adoption, in case there's anything that comes out of this public hearing that the council wants to consider before it adopts the final. That's a lot of times why we'll split this into two different meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, I make a motion to adopt the tentative budget for fiscal year 24.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed, just because I didn't hear everyone's voice that time? Okay, motion carries. Now we are moving the next four, just so we kind of get into a groove. The next four will require a roll call vote. Item number 11 is to adopt the auditor's certified tax rate. And this is Resolution 2023-06-01.
And before you do it, can we actually talk about the details since we now have them?
Yes.
Callie, do you want to do that?
Okay, the auditor's certified tax rate for fiscal year 24 is .002301. And the auditor's certified rate revenue is $829,835.
Can you read those numbers again, both of them?
The certified tax rate is .002301. And the rate, certified rate revenue is $829,835.
And just for reference, so you have something to compare, after truth and taxation, we bumped it up, and then it was negotiated down. Where we finished last year was $802,940. The amount of new revenue that we've gotten as we went from 802 to 829 is due to our new growth. That's new houses that have been built. And just because I love a good lesson, the rate last year was .002636. That was our mill levy. The rate has fallen from last year to this year, because that's how it works. To now the new rate, like she said, is .2301. So it's fallen a fair amount. As inflation happens on property values, then the rate drops, and so we get the same amount of revenue before new growth. So that's actually the numbers to show how that is happening year over year.
Okay, so we need to have a motion to adopt the auditor's certified tax rate, followed by a roll call vote.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the auditor's certified tax rate, Resolution 2023-06-01.
I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor, and we'll start with Councilman Shirtliff.
Aye.
Matt Gale, aye.
Sharon Downey, aye.
Rochelle Topham, aye.
David Burton, aye.
Okay, motion carries. Moving now to item number 12, this is RAP tax. It's Resolution 2023-06-01.
Can I just say something about this? This is the same one that we adopted last year and the year before I even was on council. They just needed updated dates to send it to the county, to say that the county is not going to collect RAP tax, and then we can actually start our process of getting it on the ballot and all of that.
Question, something that came up was, anyway. Since they're changing the dates of the election, is that gonna mess us up with this?
That's a really good question. I will send an email to the Lieutenant Governor's office.
So last year we missed a date or something on it.
Yeah, we did, and so I'll ask, sounds funny.
I don't think it will.
I don't know because the dates of the election are different, so.
I know, but
the
I don't think it
deadlines,
will,
but all the
because-
deadlines are changing.
You have to do it early enough, and I think we're early enough regardless.
Oh, yeah, we can start now,
Oh.
we're just,
I
we
don't
just
think-
don't
But it won't
want-
mess anything up. I just was
No,
curious.
it won't.
I don't think it will.
I don't think it will, and we'll just check on those.
It just gives us a little bit more time to
Probably.
check our boxes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Like
probably.
the last
But I just
time,
didn't
yeah.
wanna get in the same boat like we did last year, so.
No, there was
No,
a
yeah.
limitation because you were past the time frame. This is actually a longer time frame, so I think.
Yeah, so we'll be
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
But nothing was changed in the resolution, just the date of the 2023-601. It just updated the date.
Okay, I'd entertain a motion to pass the resolution for the RAP tax 2023-06-01.
I'll make a motion that we, pass the RAP tax resolution 2023-06-01.
I'm
I'll
sorry,
second
I'm
it.
sorry. That is a typo on the agenda, and it should be, 2023-06-02.
Oh, okay, I'll
Sorry.
redo it, okay. I'll make a motion that we pass the RAP tax resolution 2023-06-02.
I'll
I'll
second that.
second it. I'll second it then, Sharon.
Okay, and this time we'll start with Councilman Burton.
David Burton, aye.
Rochelle Topham, aye.
Sharon Downey, aye.
Matt Gale, aye.
Jim Shirtliff, aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Moving now to, item number 13, ordinance 2023-06-01, billboards.
I almost feel like we need to table this with,
So let me say a couple of things here. Larry came to me quite a while ago, went through it. We went through it a little bit. We reviewed it. I didn't review the final versions because Christian was here and he did it. I'm not aware of any things that's incongruent in it. I'm more than glad to look at it again or have him look at it again. Actually, he would look at it again. If there's concerns, but I didn't find anything that was overly concerning. With that said, I'm not a fan of imposing regulation on property more than it should ever be imposed. I think we live in America and there's a reason for that, but I think it's up to the city council whether they think this is important or not, for your community, and I won't tell you whether it is or it isn't, but you certainly have the right to be more stringent than the state of Utah if you choose to do so. And the gentleman that spoke, Mr. Uris, Tyler's father, is correct in that the state can always trump the city, and they do it all the time.
Can you address one thing? I've heard different theories on this. We currently have no billboard ordinance.
Correct.
Does that mean that we, with no ordinance, automatically
You default to the state.
default to the state? But does that mean if the state's good, it defaults that we allow it? Or does it default that since it says nothing about it, then you can't allow it?
No. If you don't say anything about it, it's allowed.
Yeah. State.
You have to regulate it. If you don't regulate it, then we come from England, where the people, our forefathers came from a state that told you exactly what you could do with your property. When they came to America, their position was, you have a free alienable right to use your property as you will. And then the government comes in and regulates it. So if you don't regulate it, then you have title in fee simple.
So next question, we do have a sign ordinance, but it does not mention the word billboard, and it doesn't talk about these kind of sizes. So by the fact that we have a sign ordinance which does not discuss this, does now, you know what I mean? And by the way, I have zero opinion on this. The
sign ordinance, and let me rephrase that, I have zero opinion on the billboard itself. I just have a strong opinion about property rights and people having a right to do with their property what they should be able to do within reason. But I don't think our sign ordinance was ever intended to regulate billboards.
Right, well, I would agree. So just the question is, what's the default since we don't have it? If they vote this
The default
down,
is the state.
we're back to not having it. What does that mean when I have somebody come in and with an application?
You would refer them like we always have. It's a state regulation. We don't regulate signs. You look to the state.
So in that, having said that,
Am I saying that right, Larry? You did a lot more work than I did.
I think Larry feels the exact opposite of what you've said. That's why I wonder.
That was my question. Well, you know, do we need an ordinance?
I know Larry.
But by tabling it, what does that mean?
Larry did a lot of work on this, so.
Right.
So where that leaves us with that discussion, I believe, and I don't know what the final answer is, but the final question is, if we default to the state and we go tomorrow and I say I'd like a permit to build a billboard in some area, the state will say, good, go to the municipality and
Yeah.
get a permit.
Right, and the municipality, we would say, we don't have anything that regulates, and they would go back to the state and say, the city doesn't regulate it.
And
Well, that's
state's
what I'm saying.
position on that is my understanding,
It's
is we
gonna
would
be
have to
just the
generate a
opposite. You gotta
document.
get something,
The state would ask us to generate some document that says we have no interest and go ahead
Well,
and do what the state
Yeah, I
says.
think you'd have to write a letter that says, we don't regulate billboard signs in our community.
Right, so but that's my point. If we vote this down, we go back to that status.
Correct. Or you're not voting it down. If you wanna table it, so we.
But I mean, but there were some people that said vote no on this, and then there's others that are like, I like it, but I wanna change it. I'm just making sure the council understands really what their options are. To approve it as it stands, which was a split vote in council, to table it and maybe discuss maybe specific details if we wanna enact it and change it, or to let it just die, and then we go back to this status. That's what I'm trying to clarify.
What I heard from everybody was that some people support it, but they want changes to it, and other people, well, that's what I heard basically, is that there was support for a billboard sign, but some people don't like this position, or some people don't like that position, and therefore, they don't want this one. It's not that they don't want a billboard ordinance, they just don't want this one the way it's written because they want lighting less prevalent, you know, with one of those $1 million signs, and they are $1 million signs. And Mr. Uris is right. If you have a vested right and the state decides they're going to take your property, which is essentially what's happening, then you're gonna buy that sign. Just like if I live in my home and they wanna widen the street, they're gonna buy and go through my house, they're gonna buy my house.
So it'd be an existing sign that we
Yeah, an
take out
existing sign
with a
is there.
ban.
If you take it out, if the state takes it out and moves it, they're gonna pay for that sign because you're taking a property right. And under an eminent domain action, you have to pay the highest and best use for that property. And that's where all the experts come in. What is the highest reasonable best use of that property? So, I'm indifferent. If you wanna pass it, you can pass it. We can look at things and you can adopt, if you feel like you need one in place, you can adopt it now and we can always remodify it. If there's something that you want changed, or you can table it for 2 weeks and I'll put it back on Christian's desk and people can contact him and let him know what they do or don't like about it.
Can it be approved conditionally?
Ooh, no, I never really encourage that.
Okay.
So if we do this, I don't know how to put this, but if you pass it, if someone comes in for billboards, they would have to get a permit.
They'd have to follow our
And you
ordinance.
say yay or nay to that permit then?
Yeah,
Based on
according to
the
our
guidelines.
ordinance right now.
Yes.
Correct,
To the ordinance, if we pass this ordinance.
correct. They would follow this ordinance, and if you modified it, then any future permits pulled would pull those permits from, according to the next ordinance. So the person who pulls that permit would have a vested right to do it according to that ordinance at that time, because they've pulled it, they're now vested. And of course, it doesn't work a two-way street. The city can't amend their ordinance later on and then say, we want you to change it. But if we amended our ordinance and the person, it's more favorable for that person, they could come back and say, I wanna reapply and take the more favorable. It works one way, it doesn't work the other.
But since we're in active consideration of it, we can, at least I know that's the way it is with land use, is this part of, this is land use, right? Since we're actively debating it, we can hold anybody to the standard that's the resolution of what we do, as long as it's done within 6 months, right? Is that correct? We can.
Say that again?
So, since it's land use, let's say that there's an application in right now, we can apply the new result to whatever we vote to that application that's in, because it's in active consideration.
Yes, there is a law that says you can do that. I have never applied that yet, ever. That it is in place though. How it actually comes out in the wash, I don't know, because I've never had it done yet in 20 years. Just hasn't come across the table. But yes, there is a law that says that.
And we don't have any applications in right now, by the way.
Right, so it's in active consideration, so you could it's almost like a moratorium. You can apply.
Yes.
You say, you be aware that we're changing it because it's on the table right now.
Yeah, and per the recent legislation, it's 6 months. And you get one bite of the apple, you can delay, put a moratorium on that land use because we're debating it. You can't do it again. I mean, you get a 6-month period to deal with what you're changing, so.
If you're worried about this, I'm not trying to make it de minimis, but this doesn't seem to have been a concern for the last, since I've been here, and that's a long time. But if you're concerned about things going right now, you could pass a moratorium, do an ordinance to pass a moratorium on any billboards, and then you have a moratorium up to 6 months.
But if you don't pass it, then it defers to the state.
Correct.
They already are regulating it.
Correct.
So this is just an additional regulation for the city to enter into the billboard,
Correct.
regulation process.
We are trying to do things in our community that the state has a one-shoe-fits-all, and what your community's trying to do is to do something that says, this is a nice shoe, but we think it should look like this, and we're gonna have it be our shoe.
But I think people need to understand that we're talking about a small area. There's still an area out here in the county that they can do what they want with as far as the state regulation. The city does not regulate the county.
We certainly can't regulate.
So there's only a small area that we're talking about, really. And as far as anything that benefits the city, it isn't substantial, and this came without a unanimous recommendation from the planning and zoning.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. How far do we go, and how far do you want to go as a city on many things with regard to your zoning, and how tight do you want to get, or how...
Yeah, we're accusing the state of doing that to the cities, coming here and telling us about, land use and so forth, and then we're doing the same thing.
And the feds do it to the states, and the counties does it,
Yeah.
sorry. It
Yeah.
just kind of runs downhill. And everybody whines to the person that's above them. State hate the feds, the counties hate the states, the city hates the counties.
If it was gonna benefit businesses, I'd say that'd be an argument, but, other than tourism and things, as far as the local businesses, I don't know if it's gonna benefit right here now, 'cause you're soliciting from miles away. And, this little bit of a niche right here as you pass through Parowan, if they haven't made a decision, I don't think, maybe something will steer them off.
Could our businesses even afford the cost? No.
You can't control what gets put up on the billboard.
Yeah.
It can be anything.
But they'd have to share, I don't know, I don't think they could to justify. There might be some, and if it would, that's great, but I think it's gonna be more for general tourism, but...
So you're arguing for or against the regulation of billboards, Dave?
I'm arguing against. I'm not supportive of it.
Of regulating them?
Yeah, of regulating. I'm not supportive of this ordinance.
Of letting, just fall back to the UDOT standard, is what you're, basically, you're saying.
Yeah.
Because if we vote this down, I'm trying to get through my head here. If we vote this down, basically that goes back to the UDOT standard. They can apply tomorrow to get a permit.
Yeah.
No, 'cause you have to, you apply to the state. The state regulates, to a degree, what we can do. I mean, they're gonna regulate, and they're gonna say, you cannot do this, and you have to do this, and you have to be so far in
No,
between.
technically, what I understood you said is if we vote this down, then they could put it on their property, right?
By the state.
By the state.
Within the state's regulations.
If the state permitted it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they go through the state process. They just go through us and they go to the state process.
Right, they would come back
And
to
then
us.
they would
we
allow it in the
we would
city
issue a
limits.
statement saying, we don't regulate it.
Exactly.
This is my understanding, we don't regulate. I've not walked through one of these, so I don't know. But as I understand it, the state has their regulation. They have to be so far apart. They have to be so far off the
Correct.
freeway. All that stuff, that they have their regulations. And then they come in and say, you go to the city. Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, I know you did a lot more of this than I did. They then go to the city and they're supposed to say yea or nay. We basically say, we don't regulate. And then they go back to the state and we'd issue a letter saying we're not regulating, and the state would follow their regulations.
They'll still need a building permit to construct
they
the
go
sign.
through their process.
But we're not gonna tell them yes or no, or how
But
high,
they
or,
can
how
use
bright.
their property as they desire. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to get, so they
Yeah.
can go back
They
and
can
then
still build it.
they go through their process and build it within 6 months or whatever it takes.
Yeah.
So you can't, we're not saying no have them or yes have them. That's basically what it comes
Right.
down to.
But wouldn't it be better if we had, I'm just thinking out loud, 'cause I don't know which way I would even vote. Wouldn't it be better if we had an ordinance putting what stipulations we would like to see as a city on it versus the state just telling them what they can do? Like, I'm against the big flashy electronic signs. That's why I don't like this ordinance, is because it doesn't regulate the brightness of a sign. Well, the state, to my understanding, doesn't have a regulation with those either. So they could put up a billboard out there with a big, you know what I mean?
It does have some regulations on digital signs, if you run a read through that. There was quite a discussion in planning, about that.
I just almost feel like we would be better off adopting something than reverting to the state, personally.
Because if we vote it down, then they're gonna have it.
Right,
Yeah.
so I would rather put whatever stipulations we feel like we would like in it, if the state's gonna tell them that they can do it anyway. This is our town, I don't want the state telling us what we can and can't do. But I am with you as well as property rights. I feel like if they own their property, they should be able to do what they want on their property. So-
That's your balancing act that you
I don't
do.
know.
And everything you do, that's your balancing
What's
act
the
as
right
government.
choice? I don't know. I don't know. Mike?
So the question that I have is, we live under these, expectations and threats that, there's gonna be a lawsuit, or, the state's gonna trump what we do. When's the last time the state got in our business?
Well, all the time.
Well, by writing new code and
Tell us what we're gonna do
Right,
here, we
they
do
write
it.
code and we adopt the code and so on and so on. But my point is if we have a regulation and it's tighter than the state code, the state is, unless it's ridiculous, the state is not likely
they're not-
to come down here and go, hey, you can't change our 500-foot requirement to a 600-foot requirement because we don't like that.
The state-
They're
that's
not
correct.
gonna do that.
That's correct. The state's only gonna come down and do something if the state law, if we go against the state law. We can be more stringent, we cannot be less.
Exactly.
So, that's absolutely right. I mean, from a pure postulation standpoint, do I think you're gonna get a neon sign here going? I doubt it. I mean, I know those are over $1 million each. I know for a fact.
Maybe.
Well, there are those, but again, that's a personal
risk.
opinion,
That's a
right?
risk.
That's an opinion, we don't know. We know that at risk here for billboards is we have somewhere between a 3 and an 8 potential for a billboard. You can have a billboard structure and have a billboard on both sides of it. And Admittedly, lighting is not, regulated in this, we probably should. But do we throw it away and go, oh well, or do we adopt it and make a resolution of some sort to make some changes to it?
I think a lot of work has been put into this, and I think something ought to be done for it. I just, it always burdens me when we put restrictions on people's property. It's what we came to America for, our forefathers did, but I think there has to be something reasonable. What you do, you just have to determine what you do.
But also, you look at it too, the property owner next to him doesn't have a say in it.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're living right next door and the gentleman talked about a light coming in their windows and,
It
affects everybody.
like Rochelle said, it's a balancing act. It really
That's the
is.
balancing act that you're gonna do, and that's the balancing act that every single government does, and you have to determine how you're going to balance that. That's why they pay you the big bucks.
And right now, we are limited to the number of billboards that would fit on our I-15 corridor, because that's all we are talking about at the moment, is the I-15 corridor.
If somebody wanted to build a billboard on Main Street, outside of the historical district, what would we do?
Well,
And not on the byway.
we don't have any code for that, none.
So they could put up a billboard right by the, campground there on the.
Well, what we haven't looked at is how far it is from all these different restrictions.
Right,
How
I'm
far
saying,
it is
assuming
from a
it,
residential property, how far the setback is off of the road, and those sorts of things.
but the only thing we're using there is our building code. We're not using any state code to say distance from a residence or anything, because they're gonna regulate I-15. They're not
So-
gonna regulate our Main Street, other than it is a UDOT highway. I've had that question from the start. I get that Holyoke Lane is the scenic byway and it has its own restrictions. But what about somewhere else in town that is not along I-15? This billboard code does address that. It restricts it to I-15, right?
It is specific to I-15, and it says they're not allowed anywhere else in the city, I believe.
Right. So, I'm not trying to paint a scary thought, but if you're, why not? You put a big cinnamon roll thing right there right by the Parowan sign, if as long as it's within our building code and stuff and setbacks, it could be done.
Yeah.
Currently.
Are you saying, remember the state puts a certain limitation on distance. You can have one sign right on top of it.
But they're not gonna regulate what isn't a UDOT, a freeway.
Yeah, right, if it's outside the UDOT.
If somebody wanted to put one on the Paraguna Highway.
Yeah, that's right.
It's state road.
It's probably never gonna happen.
But they regulate billboards on the freeway.
They
Correct.
don't on any of their other
But they're not gonna,
highways.
no one's gonna put a
State road.
billboard on the Paraguna Highway, 'cause
No, I know, I'm
just
painting this specter. I'm not trying to manipulate the
So
conversation.
just for clarification, you're saying they do not regulate anything other than the interstate? They don't regulate state
Or
roads?
state highways.
Or state highways.
Or state highways? They do?
Mhm.
Okay, it's a state highway from Center Street down to the interchange.
Okay.
Which is not part of this byway.
Right.
We already had a public hearing.
No.
So I know
Public
you,
hearing's over, I just clarifying that.
I know you planning and zoning has put over a year into this, right?
Right. On and off, it's not been a solid year. There was a period of time when it sorta just leveled off, but once it was decided to move forward, it's been pretty steady. So just understand that the limits on billboards, when we talk about where they can go, it's not just distance apart, it's distance from other things as well. Setbacks off of a road or off of a freeway, and actual zoning areas. You can't, they're limited on, I think it's the north side of the freeway as you go through Parowan. There's only room over there for one or two more signs because all those areas are residential districts. And so you're not allowed within a couple 100 feet of
So in
those.
a nutshell, Larry, can you tell us, these people that spoke here, I apologize for not remembering the name, but is there accurate that there would be just 2 or 3 signs that would ever be allowed back on the freeway now? Is that what it ultimately comes out to?
Your question is what again? Say,
They've indicated that basically by adopting this ordinance, I don't know, per your mouse, that you basically take away all billboard signs along between the two interchanges, is that correct? By what they've shown here.
that, by my judgment, that's not an accurate statement.
Okay.
Now, I went through and looked at Google Earth, looked at the zoning maps and UDOT's map, and went mile marker by mile marker, and came up with 8 to 10 potential sites.
Okay.
Now, nobody knows the real answer to that question until there's a surveyor with boots on the ground. You don't know that a fence is a boundary line or what's what, but we do know what the zones are that run along there. So depending on where, I think in, Mr. Pacheco's case, originally we looked at I think it was is it a 1,500-foot long piece? 1,200?
According to UDOT, I could have maybe squeezed in 3 along my longest run.
Right, so we, in the beginning, when it was by UDOT code, he could have put in potentially 3 signs on his property. But with increasing the spacing distance to 600 feet between signs, he's allowed 2. And potential, okay. Okay. So potentially 1.
Can we mention to the council the vote from planning and zoning, what it was to move it forward?
Well, it's a matter of record, so, I think
well, I looked it up, and
it's,
Okay.
I just looked
it's
it up.
3 to 2.
Mhm. My opinion, I don't know what everybody else is thinking, I think I would like to table it just to kind of go through it a little bit better and get more clarification on a few things and chat, but that's, I don't know.
I think we're all pretty confused with,
That's why I was like, I felt like we should just table it, not like shoot it down, but
Yeah, but I'd like to get more personally clarification on it, but
me too.
what's your guys' feeling? That's where I'm kinda.
That's how I feel as well.
I do too. I wanna make sure we do it right.
So then, what's our path forward? So we could, if you table it tonight, what do we do from here?
Well, why don't we just, if you wanna table it for 2 weeks, I will have Christian, Judd's back there having a heart attack and waving his hands.
I know.
So, I'll,
Don't have a heart attack.
I'll have Christian reach out to Judd and Larry, and Larry's probably sick of it. I know he's had his fill.
It's all right.
But, I'll have him reach out to him again over the next 2 weeks.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we table this for 2 weeks, ordinance, 2023-06-01 billboards.
I'll second that.
Okay, this will be a roll call vote, and we'll start on the other end this time. So that'll be Councilman Shirtliff.
Jim Shirtliff, aye.
Matt Gale, aye.
Sharon Downey, aye.
Rochelle Topham, aye.
David Burton, nay.
Okay, the motion to table for 2 weeks carries. All right, moving now to item number 14. This is ordinance 2023-06-02, hard surfaces. Does the council have any discussion on that one?
I'm assuming that planning and zoning recommended it, come over and, I mean, I looked through it and it looked good. I didn't have any questions.
Okay, I wanna read, the definition of, what the ADA has to say about hard surface. It says, while the ADA guidelines do not set forth a required material for your parking lot, they do require parking surfaces within your accessible parking spaces, or they require that your accessible parking spaces must be stable, firm and slip resistant.
That's from the ADA.
That's from the ADA, so it does not give a definition like, you know, was in this ordinance. It says you had to have, 6 inches, you know, or approved by planning and zoning. And, I just feel, again, we're starting to get into regulating things that we shouldn't. If they wanna do ADA, the ADA is gonna take care of it. We don't need to specify what's, you know, ADA, but then if they need to have, if they can justify within their business and have, you know, the surface asphalt, cement, whatever, and for the purpose of who their clientele is and so forth, that's great, but, I don't think we should put that on the businesses. I really don't. Especially where the ADA isn't requiring, or, you know, specifying that it be that type of a surface. I mean, they're saying gravel fits that.
Can I just say, I looked at this, my biggest concern is the ADA. We need to make sure that our building inspector, who we contract out, is complying with ADA requirements, whatever they are. I am concerned, I won't go into detail, but Dan and I've had some conversations, right, about some concerns, whether things are compliant with ADA and whether, and I think that's something we need to talk to the building department, make sure they're doing. Since we contract that out, I think as a city, we have potential liability if our building inspectors are not making sure these buildings are constructed according to ADA requirements. Because at the end of the day, we indemnify and hold under our contract, the county, we indemnify and hold them harmless. So, that's my first concern. My second concern is, though, with these hard surfaces, is we just need to make sure that as we're doing that we have taken into account that water has to go somewhere on these hard surfaces. And if they don't go into the ground, then they're gonna go sideways and they're gonna go somewhere. One of the things this city struggled with for the last 15 years has been storm water drainage. It's a problem. And a lot of small towns struggle with that. I'm not trying to use Enoch City as an example, but you saw what happened in Enoch City. They don't have any system for that to go. They have ditches, and they were overwhelmed. Now, I recognize it was a 1,000-year flood, so it really doesn't applicable. But when you require these things, you gotta make sure that you've got somewhere for that water to go.
Yeah, that was a concern of mine, because if you implement this without a storm drain system, you're just passing that on to somebody else.
You have the potential to do that, it needs to be watched. With that said, I didn't have a problem with the hard surface ordinance, so. Just my concern.
So I take abuse on this on a daily basis up both sides and down the other both sides. I have a lot of people saying our city needs to have a certain look and feel. The commercial properties as you drive in 200 South and as you drive up Main Street, that they need to have a certain degree of professionalism and look nice. And then I have others say, this is an unfair burden if you're gonna make us put in a parking lot for our business. And I say, the city council and planning and zoning are considering this. I don't have an opinion, because this is a legislative opinion, but I'm saying you need to realize there's strong opinions on this, and that's kind of, if I could just simplify them, it comes down to that. Most of our commercial businesses are gonna be in the commercial areas, which are along Main Street and 200 South. And do you want them to have to put in, parking lots, curb, gutter, and sidewalk? We are doing a storm drain master plan, you know, or do you want to allow gravel? I personally get really nervous when we have loose gravel, because I don't think that's gonna fly with an ADA lawsuit. If it's packed gravel, like a packed hard road base, maybe that's fine. If you're in a wheelchair or on crutches and you're on loose gravel, and you decide you wanna sue the city, sue the county, and sue that business, we're gonna have to defend that lawsuit one way or the other. So anyways, like from a management standpoint, just like he said, it's more of a concern from the ADA. As far as what is the vision for Parowan, that is 100% legislative, and I don't have an opinion. I'm just telling you, like I just literally had somebody in my office, red face, yelling at me, how come the city is allowing businesses to come in and build with a gravel parking lot right on 200 South? That's a shame. That would never fly in yada, yada, yada place. And I'm like, it's a legislative decision. This is how the city council wants to define what their vision is for Parowan. So, and I tell them that, and I say, I'm just gonna enforce the code that we have. But that's kind of where this kind of boils down to. So.
Well, is there any way to separate the ADA from the rest of the area? 'Cause I mean, you're talking about a large parking lot, and then you just need to provide, handicap access. Is there any way to separate that? Then just make it a broad, general, restriction or
technically ADA is gonna be part of, building code, right? So we just need to make sure we coordinate with the county and that they're holding businesses to building code and keeping their butt out of the sling and our butt out of the sling, legally, right?
That's my liability concern is, when Dan expressed this to me, I'm saying, I'm not sure this complies with ADA standards, and I think it is a problem. And I gotta say something else too. You're putting in a business, I don't know how much an asphalt parking lot costs. I mean, actually I do, but it's not, if the asphalt parking lot is a make or break it, you probably shouldn't be building that building. It's not that expensive to put in 4 inches of asphalt in a parking lot. Of course, if your Walmart parking lot, that's a lot different than a small parking lot. But my biggest concern is I am concerned that our building department has not put it into ADA standards, and if it is, ultimately, that's on us. That's gonna be on this city. So, whatever you do, that's fine, I agree with Dan, it's a legislative decision, but I'm gonna have a conversation with the county building department saying, you guys need to make sure this complies with ADA standards before you approve it.
So does this ordinance make it ADA compatible?
I think it goes a long way to do that, yeah.
Larry spent a lot of time on hard surface too.
This one's been around for a while also. Thank you. I would also suggest just thinking outside the box. I don't know if this is doable or not, and Justin just walked out, but if I was a business owner and ADA compliance was gonna make or break whether I was in business or not, because I might have to do my whole parking lot, I might consider doing a portion of my parking lot ADA compliant and do the rest of it in whatever code would allow.
Wasn't that what David was saying?
Yeah, that's what I was saying, yeah.
Yeah, I thought you addressed that in here on that, didn't you? Just certain.
No.
We don't talk about how much of it, we just say it needs to be ADA
That was the
compliant.
problem, because I just felt it was making it was, applying it to the whole, not segregating out anything,
And I'm saying that would be, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm saying that would be a minimum requirement.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily an advocate of splitting my parking lot up into, 10-foot sections and for an ADA access and ADA parking. I might just default to the whole thing being whatever it is that I'm gonna use. The other thing that I would say about ADA, they're not an enforcement agency. They made a rule that was adopted by all the building codes. And so the way that's implemented is the building inspectors implement that, and that's what you all have been talking about, and Justin is requiring the building inspectors to make sure that we're ADA compliant. This piece of code just takes a step in a direction that enforces that.
But the ADH is usually gonna be up next to the building.
Right.
And that's where I think it is, 'cause it says, what they put in there is all other areas not covered by hard surface parking in a parking facility shall be landscaped, xeriscape, or, landscape or drip system is encouraged. And
So couldn't you have ADA compliant in the front of the building, one parking space deep, and then gravel for the rest of your parking lot, like David was saying?
But I don't think that the ordinance addresses that.
It doesn't say either way.
Right, yeah. And then you're back to your stormwater.
But if
problem.
you've already got just ADH in the front of the building,
Right.
whatever,
Right.
and then the rest gravel, I mean.
Oh,
it
yeah,
doesn't-
I know, that's what I'm saying, but if
then
it's
you got
all,
storm drain going, or stormwater going,
Yeah.
whatever it is, I don't think it's not addressing either one, so I think it's just making more what,
yeah. And I think it's just complying with ADA, but also you want things that look nice, but you also want it practical, and you wanna leave something to the discretion of the business, you know? Maybe down the road they can finish it or whatever, I don't know, as long as they're, you know, they are compatible with ADA to begin with, like up against the building, like we said. I guess you get the two elements, you get the individuals that come and say they want everything, you know, to a certain standard as far as hard surfaces, as far as the landscaping, as far as, you know, make it just look almost not like Parowan. And then I understand the wanting it to look professional, but I also understand the other element that says, are we gonna make this into a concrete asphalt jungle? 'Cause Parowan does have character, and I know we're addressing the commercial and so forth, but I think there needs to be some blending and compromise or something.
they do have that in there, it says they have brick or aggregate into the, you know, into the wording and stuff, so it's not saying asphalt,
Or
not saying concrete, it's being,
Well, yeah, 'cause it says hard surface means asphalt, concrete, brick, or aggregate with an S. And, okay, so what's this aggregate?
something that's compact.
Something that,
Something like you
that
said.
blends, or I mean knits.
But also something, yeah, something, a road base or something
Road
that
base.
the wheelchair can
Yeah.
go across it,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
But-
I just think it needs to specify it. You know, divide it, I mean, you know, like say, okay, you need to have the ADA, like you say, there's gotta be a certain, you've got to comply with ADA guidelines. The building inspector's got to, you know, address that and do it, you know, in a reasonable, you know, area, maybe up where it needs to be, you know, handicap accessible. But then we'll leave it open so that if the other area can meet the standard by gravel or one of these other means, I guess it still could.
Okay, let me ask a question, Dave. Does the ADA standard specify the material used to meet their standards?
No.
Okay, so, just like we said then, we say parking area must meet ADA standards. If that's aggregate packed down, then that is sufficient. As long as the parking area meets ADA standards.
Mhm.
Isn't that the one?
Yeah, ADA's gonna probably have their own dimensions.
Yeah.
You know, what it has to come in, 'cause they have to have, you know, for van with wheelchair accessible, or, you know, larger things, so they're gonna have their say on how big it is.
But we shouldn't
Yeah.
specify.
Well, they
Those
have their choice
standards.
from going concrete, asphalt, or
Yeah.
aggregate. They have their choice.
Okay, let them, if
So
they,
loose,
yeah.
loose rock would not qualify
It's
under,
not, that's not an aggregate.
under this code,
No.
under
Mm-mm.
this piece of code.
So this ordinance does meet what we've been talking about with the aggregate, the rocks, the road base.
And it doesn't specify
ADA standard.
dimensions either, really. It
Mhm.
doesn't say, when they do, I'm not sure how it is here, but I know one in Cedar, when they do a business, they take on parking, they require you have so many parking stalls for how much you gonna have employees or
Mhm.
people coming into it. So they're gonna require you, and they should have here also a what hard base, have here. Huh?
They do, they have a number of parking stalls and,
So
and
that's
that you
where
have
you're
to
gonna
have
get
according, yeah.
what dimensions you're gonna have to do it. That's
Yeah.
where it's gonna come into play.
But that doesn't take the ADA. You know what I'm
You're gonna have to
saying?
comply with the ADA.
Oh,
to
yeah,
do it.
that's part of it,
Yeah,
but I
that's
mean, you're
part of the
talking
process.
about the entire capacity of the parking area for what capacity they're doing business inside their building, to accommodate a certain number of people. Are you talking about that, the whole parking area?
No, I'm talking just whatever we're requiring. They don't require you to do, put anything behind your building or anything like that, no.
Right, but they do, I thought you was talking about a number of,
Out front, wherever they're
Yeah.
requiring it for the ADA and stuff like that.
okay, but I guess I was talking about the parking capacity for the number of potential people, customers, or whatever.
So I think we're kind of talking about, we're saying the same thing over and over, and I think the point is that our inspector, we need to be sure is in alignment with the ADA compliance, and that's a potential miss right there. So that's going to be addressed with that. But what we're addressing this evening with this ordinance is the hard surface, and that's aggregate asphalt or concrete. And so, and I remember planning and zoning, I was gonna ask Larry again, but I think you read it. Everyone was like, well, that means you have to do this, and it was like, no, it has to be non-slip. And so that's why aggregate is one of the choices. And so the number of handicap spaces and all of that, that's a different conversation. The conversation for tonight is approving the hard surface ordinance. The building inspector will determine if they have the things they need to meet that requirement.
ADA, right?
Yes.
Well, Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the ordinance 2023-06-02, hard surfaces.
I'll second it.
Okay, all those in favor, and we'll start with Councilman Burton.
David Burton, nay.
Rochelle Toppin, yay.
Sharon Downey, yay.
Matt Gale, aye.
Aye.
Jim Shirtliff, aye.
Okay, motion carries.
I said aye.
Oh, you didn't.
I know, but I meant aye.
Okay, moving now out of the action meeting into the work meeting. Item number 15 is Lions Park, and we have the Mortensen family, Yenna Morton, to address the council. Thank you for your patience.
You're fine. Last month, I presented a letter to this council in which I outlined the agreement made between Parowan City and the Barton Vera Mortensen family with regard to property being donated for the purpose of building a city swimming pool. In exchange, the city officials agreed to build the pool and then maintain remaining property as a green space to be enjoyed by citizens of this city. As then noted, this agreement was made by handshake and never got put into writing and has resulted in much wasted time, effort, and money, as I'm finding out, with regard to this property is donated and its use. Bart himself had to go before the city council several times to remind them of this agreement. He stopped a parking lot from being put on the property. We tried in vain to stop a Head Start school from being put on the property. He complained at least 3 times that we have record of that the area north of the swimming pool had been left in weeds and not maintained as promised. He even bought the grass seed to be planted and asked the council that if the city would not plant, then he asked them to deed the property back to him so that he could take care of it himself. My purpose tonight is to ask this council to please get this agreement in writing once and for all so that all future administrations and councils will be properly informed what the agreement was, so that when planning city business, they have that in hand. There is no more wasted time and effort. let there be no more confusion on this issue. The price paid by Parowan City for that property on 300 East was the condition that it be used for the building of a city swimming pool, and then the remainder be maintained as a green space. So I'm asking the council tonight if you wouldn't consider making this agreement, a written agreement, and attach it to any documents the city has that would be pertinent to look at in the future for planning purposes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, item number 16, if there's no discussion on that, is reports, updates, old business follow-up. And we will start with, I'm going back and forth, so we'll start with Councilman Shirtliff.
We had a meeting with the airport board. It was a very informative. We had the representative of Armstrong on the phone talking about the runway reconstruct and the taxiway. Good discussion. I was kind of hoping Mick was here to make sure I'm doing this right. But one of the most interesting things about the airport board meeting was I was not aware, I mean, we had talked about it before, but this Vero Tower, it's a system that was paid for by the state of Utah, and what it does is electronically tabulates the number of operations going on at the airport. That's landings, takeoffs, all of that. And prior to the installation of this system, it was done basically by hand, you know, tick marks on a piece of paper.
Wow.
And Mick came with a printout. For example, this thing breaks it down into everything you could think of. This was for the first quarter, single engine aircraft, there was 826 operations, business jets, 2, helicopters, we had 1,336 operations. The interesting thing was the difference between what had been marked down previous to what this automated system does. And it went, Mick looked back, and we went from like 3,000 operations a year to this system is showing that we're going to be somewhere around 33,000 operations in our airport. And he mentioned that with this new system, Parowan's airport is now, based on the number of operations, one of the top 5 busiest airports in the state of Utah.
What?
And it's primarily because of the operations that SUU is doing with their helicopter landings and takeoffs and...
Correct me, is that FAA also goes off that number?
Absolutely.
The funding we get for that?
So the funding potential is much greater because of the
touching down
use.
and...
the use of the airport. The FAA, yeah, not FFA, that's the other one. FAA, their funding is totally based on use. And so, I mean, I was really impressed. I didn't realize that there was that many landings and takeoffs, and I mean, it's broken down to light sport aircraft, helicopter, business jet, multi-engine, single-engine turbine, and single-engine aircraft. So, Mick's got all this information, and like I said, I wish he had been here to make sure I did it right. But Other than that, once again, just like to thank Justin Dowley and various people on, all the help on the Veterans Monument.
That looks nice, by the way. It
Thank
really looks nice.
Outstanding.
That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you.
We had one meeting this week, economic development meeting. We just went in and discussed, how, they could, help the pool project, and also the pickleball dislocations, just update on that. They were, very, energetic and wanting to help and get going, you know. They were looking at, it was fun to see them in there looking at, on their phones with, all the lawn chairs or the pool chairs and different things and gazebos and passing it around, but it was good to see people get involved in the city, it really is, so.
Thank you.
I don't have anything to report tonight.
Okay, thank you.
The meeting that I had got canceled, but I just wanted to kind of echo what Matt just said about, the vibe around Parowan is noticeable and it's exciting, and you can just feel the excitement in the air, and just when people have a common goal, they all just rally around, and you can feel it. Not just with the pool, but with the Old Rock Church and everything that's going on with that. I know the Old Rock Church is yours, but I know that they're doing the Old Rock Church Days.
David.
Oh, is it you?
Ours.
It's ours. David and I are on.
Oh, okay. Well, the Old Rock Church Days is coming up, and I'm sure you'll probably talk about that. I don't want to take that away from you, but there's just a lot of good things happening in Parowan, a lot of opportunities, for service and to get involved if you want to get involved. So, that's all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't know if Jim was gonna mention, but, and Rochelle, you just about carried forth, but the Old Rock Church Days is, if you've seen the flyers and things, they've got a lot of things that's coming up that they're gonna do, and so they're gonna need support, and they need to have, I hope everybody can go there and support it, and I think the mayor will probably elaborate on, you know, the brick thing and whatnot, so, but it's moving forward, and so, I think there's an excitement, and I hope that it can, well, I know it'll be successful. It will, because it's part of the city, but, and then I'm sure Dan will go on about the pool. It's moving forward, and it's looking good. There's a lot of work, and a lot of things that's been done, and a lot of volunteerism there, and there's just, yeah, it's good. It's good. And the Meeks, the pond's full, we're running water through it now. We just diverted it in. So because there's the same amount going around the diversion channel that's going in, and it's cleaned up, so it's good. But I'm afraid they're gonna get it fished out, so we're trying to get the, 'cause there's a lot of activity there,
There's
fishing.
a lot.
And so we're gonna try and get that, Richard Hepworth, he says that from DWR is gonna get some different variety. They've had rainbow in there, but I think they're gonna try and get a different variety of fish, so they'll try and get those in there. With that water situation, I think we'll be fine. And, I'll read this from planning and zoning. They sent let me read this. They made a motion, because I've gotta read this, to send a positive, recommendation to the city council of the final plat of the Parowan Parkway Commercial Subdivision, contingent on the final design and an MOI between UDOT and the city being required, in addition to a fully built storm drain system servicing Parowan Parkway Commercial Subdivision, for the city will issue occupancy of final building permits. So they're gonna send that recommendation to the city, or they have, I guess, they've made that recommendation, so. And Dan, I'm sure will go elaborate on that, but they're going to, they're working on their storm drain, you know, finalizing that as part of the project, aren't they? So, and I think and the baseball is going strong out there, and the fields look good, and, most of the parks look pretty good. And I think they're being more heavily used. There's a lot of people in town today.
Summer games.
Summer games. I don't know if you noticed that. And the P Hill's still inspirational at 3:00 in the morning, so. That gives me incentive for the day when I get up and see that when I go to leave, so. Anyway, that's all I have, I think.
All right, thank you. City Manager, do you have anything tonight?
Yep, and I will be succinct. Commercial subdivision will come on the next agenda. We've already started, there's a lot of work on getting ready for their building permit, so we're working on that, but that will come to you, and it should be pretty much a rubber stamp thing administratively. They've satisfied everything. We are working with UDOT on the storm drain solution. It's been a long run to get here. This subdivision is surrounded by UDOT, so UDOT had a lot to do with they finally got their west access, so they now have both permits for both accesses.
Okay.
And we had a call with UDOT talking about how we're going to finish the drainage, which will require money from the development, money from UDOT. The city will probably participate a little bit on a in-kind. We may help do some grading just on the swales in UDOT. We need to look at some design stuff there, but it's moving forward. Everybody's excited about the ACE. There's also a hotel, and they are in negotiation to sell the second lot to another party. So I guess I better not talk about that one because it's not final, but we will be getting a hotel, and we will be getting an ACE Hardware, and there's another commercial thing going in the second lot as well. So that's really exciting.
So is the hotel the one that's going right by?
The hotel is the one
on
that's doing dirt work, and
all
just
that?
so everybody knows,
Okay.
we gave them a pre-developed, what's the term? It's basically an early excavation permit. They do it on their own risk, that the building permit may or may not be granted, but the city essentially allows them to go and start doing grading with the dirt work. They had to get a prairie dog clearance, in order to do that.
Darn.
Otherwise they get shut down, but, so they are doing some dirt work. That does not mean the subdivision is 100% finalized or the building permit, but we are this close to that. They've got to move a lot of dirt into that place. They have to over-excavate a hotel. It's a 3-story hotel. It's incredibly heavy, so they've got to dig way down, and then they've got to build it back up, and then they've got to get up above the floodplain, because that is in a FEMA floodplain area. So they've got to do a ton of dirt work, and they really wanted to get working on that. That's a pretty typical thing for a city to do, or a county. Meeks, I just wanted to say, Skip, what's his name, the artist? I can't remember his last name.
Oh,
Spike. I said Skip. Spike. He said that he would volunteer to do lily pads if we wanted to plant and have a lily pad colony at Meeks. We'd have to decide whether that's a natural plant or not, but he said it's really good for fish, it's really good at keeping moss and other stuff out and keeping a healthy pond.
I didn't know a lily.
I'm not an lily
was
pad
a-
expert, but I just wanted you to know that he volunteered. I was talking to him one day about flood mitigation, and he said, hey, just so you know, I'll volunteer. So something to think about. Pool, I did what's that?
No, I just don't think about that.
Oh, I did an extensive update on the pool, so I won't do an extensive update. I will just say you will be seeing concrete going in starting tomorrow. The tight timeline, I think we're gonna have enough money to be able to re-plaster the pool. It is in dire need. Not dire need, but it is in need. There's a lot of micro fractures in the plaster and everything. It's fine. We can sand it and it'll probably last us a year or two, but it's pitted, and it would be good if we could to replaster it, but there's no way with the timing, with the concrete, the deck, the coping, there's just no way that it all works, because you can't be in there working on plaster. It's the last thing you do. If you have fresh, soft concrete, you're gonna mess up your concrete. But we can do that in the fall or in the spring, still within our fiscal year with the money that we have, And, so I think what we'll probably do is we'll probably get the plaster, good enough, sand it down so that it's not so rough and that it looks clean and it doesn't create the bloody toe problem. But, we'll go through a process and bid it out. If we have the money left over, that's the other thing, is it gives us that buffer zone on our budget, because it's been really hard to kind of keep track of everything, as it's been a moving target. When we get done with everything this summer, we'll know how much extra money we have left over when all the dust settles, and then we'll know whether we could go in and replaster it. And talking to one recommendation from a pool expert, he said it'd be better to not do it in the fall, and then it sits all winter. By the way, we need to do different things on the maintenance of that. They recommend keeping it full and keeping it circulating, put your covers on it, but you keep it up to just above freezing level all winter long. It's when we let it dry out that it does damage to the pool. So anyways, but we'd probably replaster it in the spring, just before opening in the spring. But it's something to think about, so that's one thing. Fencing, by the way, we had water in it. We had armed guards walking around the place. Not really, but we gotta keep people out, and while there's water in there, it's an attractive nuisance. So we had the water in just as long enough that we could test for leaks and retest the chemical inserter and all that. I'm pleased to announce that all of that is functioning great.
Yay.
Everything is reading fine, everything is working, and we plugged the leaks, which I talked about last week. Fencing is a priority. We need to get that thing fenced, and so we can keep people out. They gotta finish the concrete work. It's gonna be one of the final steps of the concrete work, is doing the fencing, so that is a priority.
No skinny dipping.
I just, two more things. One, I just want to reiterate, open door policy, whether it's the council, you have questions on the budget, if you want to tweak something or adjust something, we can. If we do anything major, I would say that we ought to have another public hearing, because we've kind of presented it the way it is. If we're gonna do some major overhaul, it's usually good to probably listen to the public. But if you did want to tweak something, let me know, or if you have any questions about it, let me know. If the public has any questions about it, just come in and talk to me. I'll make time. And I do not want to steal Callie's thunder about city council filings, but I do want to say we have a number of people that have filed for city council, and I really want everybody who's filed to know that they're welcome to come into my office and ask any questions about the city. An informed group of people that are running for office is better than people who don't really understand parts and specifics and then maybe start slinging mud at what, and it's better to have a good debate and a good conversation based on facts. So if you have any questions about how the city runs at all, I never would get into endorsing or helping one candidate over another. As a city manager, that would be suicide, but I do want to make sure that everybody knows that open door policy also extends to anything in the city. If you got questions, you put your name on the ballot. It's really hard to put yourself out there. Come in and let's talk. I would rather you probably come to me than maybe go to specifically the department heads. But if there's a question and we need to get some details, then I can wrap them into a conversation or something like that. So I just like to have good civic debate based on like facts rather. This is the time where things kind of can get messy. So hopefully we don't get messy. But anyways, that's all I have.
That was so fast.
I used my quota of words.
Okay, so today I said to someone, we have a lot of plates spinning. The master transportation plan is in progress, the master drainage plan is still in progress, the master active transportation plan is still in progress, the Old Rock Church engineering,
water and sewer master plan.
Water and sewer, so meetings, plates are spinning, all these things are happening. Really, in many cases, it's just overwhelming, but it's manageable, and everyone is working well together to make sure we take really good care of all of these things. In driving around through town, I think everyone has recognized how beautiful the Veterans Memorial is, how beautiful our parks look, the Heritage Park, Meeks Pond, the town really looks beautiful, and that feels great, I think, for all of us who live here. We will have a visit from Vision Iron County next council meeting. It's a group that basically is team-centered. The team that I'm on is Community Character. I talk quite a bit about it and how important it is to figure out who we are and where we want to go. I know that I hear sometimes we have a bit of an identity crisis. We want to keep the history, and then the other side is we want it to look like this other thing. So we do have a bit of an identity crisis, so we definitely need to make sure that we're talking about our community's character and drawing some hard lines with our ordinances. On fundraising BRIC, we were able to get that set up, and they kept saying, our IT person needs to talk to your IT person, and I just wanted to give a shout out to Judy because she did a phenomenal job, and she is our IT person among all the other many things that she does. And those should go live online probably next week. We just are waiting for one more step. It could probably tomorrow. So you'll be able to buy bricks, we'll be able to get forms out if people would rather do paper orders, things like that. But that's really exciting, and is a big part of the fundraising for the Old Rock Church Days. The other thing that I wanted to mention is I did receive an answer on the T-Mobile grant for pickleball courts. We did not receive that grant. We still have an open one with AARP. I do plan on reapplying. They said they had a precedent number of applicants, and so I'm going to continue to push on that. The other thing I just wanted to recognize that we do have 2 of our candidates that are here that have stayed all night, and I probably should have just invited them to come up and introduce themselves during public comments, but I didn't want to put them on the spot either. So, but we do have Deborah Slotboom here, and we have John Dean here. So I appreciate you being here tonight, and if you don't know them, I recommend that you take the time to get to know them. And the very two more things. I'm talking fast. So we had 4 applicants apply to be muralists at the pool. One of them ended up taking a job up north, so we don't have her with us, but the other 3 are Justin Whitelaw, Allie Cecil Harris, and Delaney Deutschlander, and they have all agreed they'd like to collaborate and do something together. So we're in a planning process for the murals at the pool. I think that's really exciting that we have these interested artists that would love to be part of this. And the very last thing, I didn't bring it in with me because everyone knows I'm klutzy and I'm stumbly, but I have the broken mirror that was removed from the pool. I just kind of did the dimensions of it. There are 6 panels, and we talked early on about some old pictures of people using the pool. One of our public works people, Stephen Ward, said, well, that would make a really cool old picture frame. Don't change the paint, don't change anything about it, just put old pictures in it and we could put it somewhere. So I'm asking again. I know I had a couple of people respond and say they had a neat photo, and so if we can get 6 really neat photos, I think that would be neat to use that old window. We're also repurposing the diving board for a bench, and so when people say it's so sad we had to take the old diving board out, and we didn't. We're just repurposing it. We're using it in a different way, in a safer way. So I think that is all I have for this evening. So we have one motion.
Mayor, one more thing.
Kelly might have something,
Oh.
Judy.
Yeah,
Oh, shoot,
but
sorry.
before that, maybe, is it appropriate to announce about the hiring a pool manager?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay.
No, because we still need to call the other 2.
Okay, administrative staff updates. Sure, I would not say no to you.
Went flat. I wasn't sure what the procedure would be moving forward on getting my request followed through on. Advise me as a council, what needs to happen to get that agreement in writing?
So I was hoping that Justin could weigh in on this from a legal perspective, and you had stepped out when she talked. She had made a request that the city give us a Reader's Digest. We put something in place that would basically
Reflect the agreement that was made with Barton Vera concerning the property that the pool is on, so that future administrations, there was so much confusion because nobody knew what was happening.
I think the easiest way to do it is not necessarily agreement, is to do a deed restriction and you record it on the property. And so you say this property, you do a deed restriction that says the property will be utilized for these limited purposes. And you list those out and then you record that deed and it's there forever. Because it's a deed restriction, it's recorded against the property.
And that would go forward for as long as I mean, if the pool is removed, then it's still green space or a park or whatever?
Well, it'd go forward until I'm dead. No, it will go forward, it's recorded. And if the city were to attempt to transfer it, or those type of things, it would go with it to whomever it transferred.
Just a question, popped in my head, is that
All
restricting?
I'm saying is the agreement gets lost. Now, you could do an agreement and record it against the property, or you could do a deed and record it against the property.
Legally, is that as far as
It's a
restricting the future?
conditional use deed
Oh,
or
of
whatever
the
you're
city council?
talking about.
I've really struggled with that over the years, because some things you can and some things you can't. That's why you have a municipal building authority, and some things you can't combine future city council on. I do not believe that would be something that would that would be wrong to bind a city council on.
Okay.
Because it's not financial, it's not an impact, it just says you can't use it for these things. But, you know, I know they did his park. I guess my biggest problem, and again, I know you're not gonna like this, but I don't think it's right to sit there and bind future council for the next 200 years. I mean, to me, to some degree, maybe the city needs to say, you know what, let's take it back. We don't wanna maintain it anymore, or something to that effect. Because it's not appropriate to bind future in my opinion, I'm not talking legal, but it's not appropriate to bind city councils for the next 200 years and force a city to do something that's not in the best interest. That park is huge out there. You got major water problems, and you gotta keep it into a green park. That's a problem. It's against the things that we're trying to achieve here in reserving water. Go by my office and take a look at my lawn. It's dead. I killed it all.
Well, it could be xeriscaped or beautified, but to put buildings or other structures on there,
But again, it was donated to the city for a park, for people, for the community. And you're telling the community, you will dictate this park according to what I want, or what we wanted, instead of saying, you know what, we could put a rec center on there where the citizens could get 10 times the benefit out of that as what's being got right now
are you going
versus,
to put a parking lot on that?
well,
Don't get
if you put in, but that's just my opinion, I'm sorry, it's just my opinion.
Yeah, I have a question. Do you know if there was any water that was given to the city, or was it, tied to that property? Did it have water rights?
You know, I don't know that, but I would assume that,
I would think that would be a good thing to find out.
well, and I don't know how you would find
Go look
that
at the
out.
deed.
Yeah,
All you gotta do is go pull the deed, see if there's.
because all the old deeds showed, if there was water, it showed, 1 hour, 2 hours,
Well,
whatever.
if it's, yeah, usually.
No, I'm talking surface, I'm talking, irrigation,
A lot of times when was this park deeded? When did it?
in the early 60s.
Okay, typically back then, you could pass water. It was until 1996 that you could not pass water by a stock certificate. You had to pass it by stock certificate. Prior to that time, you could pass a water share by deed. So if there was a water share that went with that, it probably would be on the deed. That's how they typically did it.
Yeah, but all the water in the city was basically turned back to the city when they put in the irrigation system, the pressurized irrigation system. So even though everybody that had the water on their property, it basically was turned back and saying reallocated.
Right, we
And
agreed
so-
to give them water. If they turned their water over, we would do a pressurized irrigation
Right,
system.
right.
And-
But there was what we used to call dry lots and places that, that did not have water. And I'm just wondering if this ever had water rights.
Only thing I could do is references to the deed. If it's not there, I don't know how the city, I've never seen the documents where the city got those shares of water and then said, we'll do a pressurized irrigation system, send it back out. I've never seen that. I've heard many times, and, the rumor mill.
Well, your deeds, they still show that water right, even though it's not valid, so to speak. They still show.
A share of water on it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I'd pull that deed and see
Yeah.
if it is. But you could certainly transfer water shares outside that deed if they surrendered them by some other different
Mm-hmm.
reason. But that would be a good start, because that usually was on the deeds back in the 60s.
Right, right.
I don't know what the implication of there being
Well, I'm just saying, if you're gonna keep it a green space and there was no water originally, that's, you know, the city then has been actually putting water onto that area. I mean, sure, it was, everybody's done that, but to ask that it be kept a green space and it didn't have any water rights to begin with, that's maybe, you know, kind of asking to tap into the city resources.
The city agreed to whatever that was the agreement, just, you know, that it be a park, and not, you know, not to be put to commercial use or, other use, so,
Well, I'm just inferring the problem with water now.
Is your definition of park and my definition of park might be two different things. We went to probably 10 parks in Europe, and there were 10 different types of parks.
agreed. I can't tell you well, I have a pretty good idea of what Bart visualized. The fact that he bought the grass seed and everything, he didn't want it in weeds, he wanted it maintained and beautified. So, xeriscape, water-wise things, absolutely, I'm all for it. But, and again, I don't want to put my will, it's trying to get the bottom line of the agreement was to protect that property from being developed for other purposes that the city may deem necessary for that property, and that's Head Start School is one example. That should never have gone on the property, but we had nothing in writing. So, that's what I'm trying to avoid in the future. Just honor the spirit of the agreement. It was a gift, a generous gift to this city to have that property. They didn't come to him, he went to them voluntarily. And I think that agreement between the city and Bart should be honored. And if that goes on the deed, which you've suggested, I'm asking you, what can be done and what can you do?
You guys decide, I will write whatever you want me to write, how's that? But
Well, yeah, we'll have to have a discussion. I know that is one of the concerns and I've heard about it for quite some time, is the amount of water it takes to grow grass at the park and the cost to the city to maintain grass at that park that doesn't really, you're fighting nature. It's rock and
It
it's...
was an agreement.
Mm-hmm.
It was a handshake agreement. They had water issues back then, I'm sure. No one knows the next 20 years what's going to happen to that property. I just know that the city made a commitment, and handshakes meant something then. It should mean something to the people of this city.
So I would suggest that we, if the council wants to, bring it back on the action meeting and decide whether we want to put any sort of deed restrictions on it or not. This is one of the reasons why, if we are going to accept any donated property, my recommendation would always be we set expectations going into it, and we tell people if they're gonna donate property that we do not want any strings attached, even if it is that we don't get the property donated, just 'cause it makes, it can live in, we can be in the situation we're in, which is not where the Mortensons wanna be, it's not really where the city wants to be, but we're kind of in this situation. So you wanna set that expectation at the time of donation as either we agree to be bound by, certain things, or we'll only, accept the donation if the understanding is that there are no strings attached, but we'll do our best. So I guess the question is do we bring it back on the action meeting, and do we want to consider any deed restrictions or not? And if they are, what are they? And, like now you get into the semantics of words. What does green space mean? Does that mean green? Does it mean open space? Does it mean, I fumbled into this talking about, I thought rec stuff that fit what I had heard this was donated to, and it's like, well, no, that doesn't fit. Well, some people, even pickleball courts would be considered still open space or part of a green park or something like that. So do we want to enumerate a list of things that can and can't be done and decide whether we want to, and take a vote, whether we want to put a deed restriction? Or, I guess this is a work meeting, so we're not going to take any action or anything like that, but that's where we go from here on. I guess we could put it on the work meeting and say, and have the conversation and take action, or whatever you want to do.
I'm asking you to do the honorable thing. If it were your parent who had made the donation in good faith and the city accepted it with that agreement attached, take the word green space out if you want, use the word park, beautify, whatever you need to at that point, but still have a restriction or a condition for the use of the property with the deed.
Well, I take umbrance with that, but.
You have for a number of
I know,
years.
I know, I take
When the
umbrance.
school was going in, you're the one that I notified, and I was
You're the
told.
one I'm the one you'd like to shoot, and I.
No, not
you're the
shoot,
person.
but there was no recourse for me in your
There wa-
book, and, so therefore, there was no recourse. But I'm asking for a correction, at least the spirit of the gift, just represent the city as you'd want. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Did Kelly have anything?
Did Callie have anything?
Do you want
No,
to
we
say
don't.
how many candidates we have?
So we did have, a lot of candidates declare candidacy. We had 11, and I think that's the most we've had since I've been the recorder, so.
How many seats?
For
Three. So we'll have a primary.
Yes, you will.
And then out of those 11, you do a primary
Narrow it to
6?
Seven, half?
Six.
It can't be more than double the amount of seats.
That's right.
Wow. That's a lot of people.
Okay. We have one motion left to make.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you.
Yes.
You guys move a city council meeting to another Thursday. I have every night scheduled with the town somewhere.
We don't move it on Thursday?
No, we moved last one.
Oh,
You moved last one to Thursday.
oh, I wasn't here. I don't blame me.
I couldn't be here because I had other commitments, other towns.
It was graduation that night.
I'm surprised you didn't think about